Hello, everybody. Look forward to hearing that back on the playback because I'm doing some tests to see what I can make happen on these streams, not so that I can do concerts. Most of you guys play as well or better than I do, but in terms of demonstrating things live. So this is that 58 Bassman, and all the hum, buzz, weirdness that from last time is gone. It was a cathode follower Tubin V2 that was giving up the ghost, so nothing wrong with the amp. But people always complain when I put a mic in front of an amp that does not have reverb. In fact, on the last video on that amp, people were like, I could never use an amp that doesn't have reverb, blah, 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 blah. So got the Royer on it. And in real time, I'm applying a plate reverb. This is the Abbey Road plate reverb. I don't remember if I used 1 or 4. But just for a basic sense of space. And it sounded good in my test stream earlier. I hope that it sounds good now when it's live. I didn't want it to be like this huge, big, wet thing. Just a sense of, hey, that sounds like a record of some sort. For those who find it alienating when you hear a dry amp with a close mic, because people don't tend to experience that very often unless they're in the crazy worlds where I like to be. I've also changed the vocal settings because in the last stream, people were saying for some of them it was too low. Others were fine. I think it depended on the max volume of your playback system. But I went back and listened, and indeed, it was quieter than I wanted. So now I'm pretty much about negative 15 LUFS, occasionally negative 14, which is like YouTube perfection. Peak levels at negative 1. So, yeah, well, Sebastian, BC77, yours is one of the ones I looked at. And the last time I was back down about negative 20, which is a good, safe place for live voiceover because it's really hard to clip. And so I have gone through and spent some more time with some tricks and stuff that I remember from my days back when I was an audio engineer. And I've got it now, so it should be a good 6 to 9 dB louder overall, which is quite a bit of a jump, but it shouldn't be clipping or overdriving or sounding yucky. So I also made some tweaks to the visuals here, and which focus point, I look better at 50 millimeters than I do at 27. So, in theory, I should be back 4 feet and I have this thing at 50 millimeters and I would look thinner. Very flattering, but I can't see the screen here if I'm back there, and I can't move the camera any farther in that direction. Sadly for me and my sad vanity. By the way, speaking of vanity, I have found the exact price of my vanity. Last week, when I wasn't feeling so great, I went to Walgreens, which is, for those of you who don't live in the U.S., it's a big chain drugstore, chemists. And I had to buy something. And I get to the counter, and the 20-something-year-old kid working the counter offered me a senior citizen discount because I have gray hair. And part of me was like, I'm only 53, mother, ugh. But the other part of my brain was like, $3 is $3. So I took the senior citizen discount. So the price of my vanity is apparently $3. Good to know these things about yourself. Let me scroll up to the top and get to any questions that have already been asked. Sorry to do the free range intro. My energy level is much higher than it was last week, obviously. I also am a little bit out of breath because I had to move some stuff, some amps around in the other room right before this started. So it'll take me, I'm still recovering a little bit from the yuck of the past 2 weeks, so I'm a little bit short of breath. Let's see, Nick Sarah says, 2 questions for you today. All right, Nick, be greedy. 2 questions. Can you explain why cathode bypass amps are fine with 100% dissipation? And he's getting some DC on eyelet board. Does that put power tubes in danger? Thanks. First point, cathode bias tubes, look at the data sheets. They are designed to operate their best between 90% and maybe 120% dissipation, depending on the tube type. In theory, they'd all sound best about 110% dissipation. In reality, Some tube types, like an EL34, draws an awful lot of current at 110%, but it doesn't draw as much at 90%. For a quick and dirty answer that will make sense in a chat like this, let's see where we are on the screen. So if this is a cathode bias amp and you bias it at 100%, and then you play, this is where it idles. When you play, it may go to 50%, 70%, even 40%. It's going to spend most of its range right about here when you actually play. And when you really play hard, it'll be a little cooler. You'll get might get some clipping distortion, some colder bias artifacts, crossover distortion is what I meant to say. But in general, you're going to start here and be in this range. And remember, for any engineers watching this is kind of a dumbed down overview. If you want to really know how this works, there are books to go read, and they're this thick because you can't really sum it up. In a fixed bias amp, you may bias it at 40%, 50%, 60%, 70%, and when you play, it goes into this range. So when you're at fixed bias, it may be biased here, and then when you play, it comes over to this range. If you had a cathode bias amp biased here and you played, it would go down to terrible, terrible crossover distortion. So you bias the cathode bias amp here, and it ends up being about here when you're actually playing it. So that's a 30,000-foot view level of the subject. As far as eyelet board DC putting power tubes in danger, it can if you have leakage, particularly on the grid connections for the power tubes, so that it might throw the bias off. Say it's supposed to be negative 42 volts DC, and you have positive voltage leaking there, so it goes down to negative 35. That can mess up your power tubes. But it depends on where on the eyelet board the DC leakage is. If it's somewhere else in the circuit, you may have DC on a pot. You may have some noise, but you're not going to damage your tubes. It's mostly the grids and the bias reference and a fixed bias amp you have to watch out for. Pardon me. Let's see. Sebastian says, I didn't fully get why turret or PC board themselves can become conductive. Is it the quality of the board or a time effect and heat damage that changes the molecular structure? Well, in general, a good quality turret or PCB board is made of high quality fiberglass, FR4, is it G10 is the other name for it, FR4. Really good stuff. It's thick. It does not want to become conductive. The only way it can become conductive is if something like a screen grid resistor is mounted right up against it and burns, and then can actually physically char the board, at which point there is carbon in that board, and sometimes the board's toast, sometimes you just carve away the carbon, cut out the area that burned. And that's why it's very important, even on a high quality FR4 fiberglass board, whether it's turret or eyelet, that you mount things which get hot up over the board with some airflow. So if they burn, or even if they get very, very hot, you're not going to scorch the fiberglass. So that's the number one cause, just heat damage. Fiberglass is a woven thing and has all these weaves, and then it has a sealant coat, usually epoxy. And if there's a break in that epoxy for whatever reason, then you can get moisture down in the weave, and it can expand and contract, and you can actually have moisture absorb. But generally, a good quality board is very much sealed with epoxy, and it's just not a real issue for moisture getting into that. So as long as it doesn't have any physical damage to the board where the structure could be affected and the inner weavings can be exposed to moisture, it doesn't have any burns where literally carbon tracks form, you're not going to have a problem. The issue is Marshall, like on the JCM 2000 DSL and TSL 100 amps, also the 50s, but mostly the TSL and DSL 100s in the JCM 2000 series, they used the world's shittiest fiberglass, and it became conductive. As to why it did faster or much more so than any other fiberglass ever used by a professional amp company, I cannot tell you. I am not a molecular engineer. I'm not a chemist. I don't do that part of the world of science, but I know that that stuff was really pale and really, really obviously became conductive. So I don't know what all the classifications of fiberglass are. I know that we have FR4 and G10 or whatever. That means that there are other classifications. I assume that there's some classification which is really cheap, so they went with the cheap stuff, but it's not good for heat or becoming conductive, because they certainly did. Hey, Terry on the Hill, thank you very much. He'd like to learn how to change and bias power tubes by himself on a 72 Bassman. Where do I start? Well, the way I bias amps is not a way that I feel comfortable telling people on YouTube how to do, particularly just verbally without being able to show you, because what I do is called a DC, I'm measuring the DCR resistance of the primary. So I'm dealing with very high voltages, potentially high currents, and is not the way to learn how to do it. It's not the starting point. For most owners, they should go get a good set of bias probes, where it's a little thing that plugs into the socket and the tube plugs into that, and it tells you what the measurements are. Bias right is one of them. The issue is that in order for the numbers that gives you to mean anything, you need to have a reference chart or a reference calculator, in which case go to robinette.com. He's got a series of different bias calculators, including fixed bias, which will be perfect for your Bassman. So that you can say, well, I want it to be at 55%. That means I need to have it say 40 here instead of 35 or whatever. But for the 35 or the 28 or the 40 measurements on the bias probe to have any correlation to reality, you need to know what the B plus is at the plate of the tube. And not all bias probes give you that. So it can be tricky to know what you should do. And one of the things that people don't realize is that when you change the bias, when you turn the bias trim pot, yes, it's going to change the current draw that you measure with the bias probe, but it's also going to change the B plus. So as you bias it hotter, the B plus drops. As you bias it cooler, the B plus increases. So that's always a variable, the B plus. So you make a change to the bias pot, the B plus will change as well as the current. So you have to measure, find the current measurement that aligns with the, no pun intended, current B plus, because they change together and they can change in different directions. Most bias probes also measure the screen current, not just the plate current. And so they actually give you a margin of safety. If you were to aim for the internet preferred 70%, you're probably going to be about 63%. In general, on a 72 Bassman, I would look for about 55% as a good place to be with 120 volts on the wall. That way, if the wall voltage goes up, as it does in a lot of places, you're not going to go into tube nukage range. And most Fenders were designed to be biased kind of cool. A lot of them came from the factory about 47, 50%, and they've always sounded fine like that. 70% is the darling number on the gear page, but it has very little to do with most amp designers' reality. Most mesas are barely over 30%, if that. A lot of mesas are down to like 15, 20%. Now, I'm not saying that's a good thing. I think mesas sound terrible like that, and they sound a lot better if you get them up in the 40% range. But, people with one breath will tell you that you need to have your tubes biased 70% at least, and then they'll tell you Mesa rules, and they don't realize that the Mesa that they think rules has got a 18% bias dissipation. So, hey, Dustin. Hey, Emilio. Ken Jespin. Let's see here. Got a good question from Lloyd Williams. Hey, Lloyd, if valves are biased at 70%, does that mean that a super lead would put out 70 watts? Sorry if this is a dull question. Excellent channel. Love it. It's a big, big question. If you have a super lead, which has 100, which is in theory 100 watt amp, it has 4 EL34s, and EL34s are rated for 25 watts, and you bias them at 70%. You're going to be getting pretty much when you really play hard and the amp's turned all the way up, you're going to be, not the preamp gain all the way up, but no master volume. And the preamp is turned up to the point where it's going to give you the maximum signal before compressing. Because on a scope, if you're to look at what's happening in your super lead, it's going to start off like this. You turn it up, it's going to go like this. You turn it up, it's going to go like this. You turn it up, it's going to go like this. But at some point, it won't go any louder than this. It'll just go from rounded over to square tops and bottoms. So that'll be right where the rounded sine wave begins to turn into square tops and bottoms, and the actual level doesn't go up. That's the maximum wattage. I'm giving you a very rough idea of that. And you can reach that same wattage, or what we will perceive as the same wattage, at 50%, 60%, 70%. It might be a 2 watt difference, a 3 watt difference. It might be as much as a 5 watt difference. We don't hear that because it is so freaking loud. And that is like a 1, maybe 1.5 dB difference. And about 1.5 dB is the smallest amount that most people can predictably detect a difference in 1.5 dB. Mastering engineers, no, they can hear like, oh, that's like 1/3 of a dB. The rest of us, especially through guitar speakers in a regular environment that we're listening through, about 1.5 dB. So you're not going to really notice a difference between a Marshall biased at 70% or 55% as far as the output. There'll be some difference in the character of the overdrive, and that's totally to taste. Hope that helps. But in terms of a 70% super bias does not make a super lead go out to 70 watts. It means it's idling. When it's idling. Each of those tubes is drawing 70%. So 70% of a 25 watt tube, you had to do something where I've got to do 7 over 20, 70% of 25. Someone out there already knows the answer to that. Let's make it a 20 watt tube, in which case it'd be 14 watts. So I'm probably looking about 15, 16 watts for a 25 watt tube. So you're idling there. But that's like I said earlier, when you idle here and then you play, it goes up to here. It gets more. This is probably not the best way for me to talk about this because it's really nice to have charts and graphs. But then you end up writing a book that already exists out there. Look at Merlin Blenco's stuff at valvewizard.co.uk, and all the Jack Dar books are out there in the public domain now. You really need to read this stuff. It's difficult to... Some things there aren't really good analogies for. Hey, Matt Johnson, appreciate that. I had a wonderful time in England, and the thumbnail today, we were over around the corner from Abbey Road over in just, what's that neighborhood there? Just past Soho, turning into Marylebone, and I guess I'm not really sure where the dividing lines were. Anyway, we're over by Abbey Road, Savile Road, and all that stuff. And I knew where the Bowie photos had been taken. So we went around the corner, and there's a picture there where Bowie was standing on the cover of Ziggy Stardust. There was a couple of trash bin bags right there where he had been standing. And then around the corner from that was the phone box where he did the photo on the rear of the album. So that was kind of cool. And a long time ago, this was just anonymous, but someone has, as you can see, painted the whole thing purple and blue with zigzag lightning stripes, and it's very, very nice. So that's like 2 blocks from, not Abbey Road, that's 2 blocks from number 3 Savile Row, where the Apple headquarters were. That's what I meant to say, Apple headquarters. And that's 3 blocks from Fortnum and Mason, where we went and bought all kinds of ludicrous cheeses and apples for a picnic, and it's a good time to be over there. I'm not sure if that's Marylebone. I'm not sure if that's Soho. I'm not sure if that's part of St. James. Basically, the only thing we could afford in that neighborhood was a pint and a little bit of cheese and apples for a picnic. Might have been the cusp of Mayfair. I'm not sure. It's not like you're walking around and there's like, oh, you're now entering Mayfair. You know when you're in the city of London or the city of Westminster, but beyond that, I'm not sure where the neighborhoods divide up. But we had a fantastic time. And I have so many photos, many of which I'd love to share, but I don't want to bore you guys with what I did on my summer vacation kind of thing. and many of which would have made great thumbnails for various things. But my wife took a lot of them, and she took with the camera vertical in portrait mode. Kills me. Landscape, baby, landscape. We had fierce arguments over this. So I started taking more of the photos myself. So I've got more to use. Yeah, Marylebone is my thought, John, but I'm not really sure. Savile Row, and it's all an I can't afford it stand. So I can't afford it stand. Would have been funny if I pronounced it correctly. Hey, old guy, if you hear this, I hope you and all your stuff made it through the storm okay. We just got tons of rain, but we didn't get any big winds. Though my internet was out until about an hour and a half ago, from 11 o'clock last night, so I'm very glad to be able to do this today. I wasn't sure I was going to be able to. Oh, hey, Mark Spurgeon, hope your back's feeling better. Pardon me. Hey, Kimball, you just got a Dr. Z Jetta and wants to know if it has the same issues with the standby and master volume circuits as their other amps. Well, I don't know how many of their other amps had that issue. I know that the issues you're talking about from my videos were in the Mark I version of the, what do they call it? The Maz Junior, the Maz 18 and the Maz Senior, the 38. And that those issues were addressed by Dr. Z themselves in the Mark II versions of those amps. And since the Mark II versions of those amps don't have those issues, I would be very surprised if your relatively recent Jetta would have those problems. So hopefully it's fine. The main issue with the master volume on the Mark I was if you turn the master volume down, it affected your reverb send levels. So your reverb was all over the place. If you're not having that problem, odds are you don't have a problem with your Jetta. And if your Jetta's got a tube rectifier, just don't use a standby switch. It's not going to be necessary either way, even if it's correctly implemented. The amps on my channel that you saw those problems with were very old Dr. Z's, the Gen 1, Mark I Mazes, and the two old Route 66s, and he hasn't made those in, 15, 20 years? So odds are your amp is fine. Dr. Z makes good amps. I was just pointing out some flaws in the amps that were on my bench would happen to be made 15, 20 years ago. And as far as I know, everything I pointed out with two exceptions has been corrected. Number one, they still don't use tooth washers for everything because the pot shaft is not long enough to go through the chassis and the thick faceplate or rear plate if there's a tooth washer. So if you have one of those amps, you just have to make sure that all your pots and jacks are tight because there's not going to be a tooth washer to help you out. So every 3 months, just take your knobs off, make sure everything's still tight, put your knobs back on, you're good. Second of all, if you have a Dr. Z with reverb, make sure that if you want that, you buy the combo version, not the head version, because in the head versions, the reverb tank is too close to the power transformer, and you get a lot of hum. And that hum is not present in the combo version, where the tank is a foot away or more from the transformer. So if you must have reverb in a Dr. Z, get the combo or use a pedal. Notice that Fender for years made the Bandmaster head with no reverb, and the head was the same height as all the other amps. Then they made the Bandmaster head with reverb, in the early 70s, the Bandmaster reverb head, and all of a sudden it's twice as tall as the other Fender heads out there because they needed to get some distance between the transformers and the tank so they could have a reverb tank in a head. And it's very common for a lot of amps to have that issue. That's why a lot of heads today, if they have a traditional reverb circuit, have a relatively short tank, they can move it physically away from the power transformer. Even like a JCM 900, they do that. Hey, RJ Electric from Sweden. I love that we have people here from all over the world. Arif, Celestial Blue speaker versus Greenback, it's totally subjective. It's up to you. And it depends on the amp. In JTM 45 or an AC30, I do love the Greenback. I'm sorry, I do love the Blue Alnico, but that doesn't mean that it's going to sound bad with the Greenback. My only caveat is typically I find that greenbacks sound better in a closed back cab than they do in an open back cab, and I think that they do a lot better in a large volume 4x12 than they do in a small 2x12, or even some of the slant top Marshall 4x12s, the diagonal top. I think the big straight box cabs are the way to go. I think they need a little more help developing the low end, whereas a Blue shines in an open back cab. So there's a lot more to it than just the speaker. But if you're a good player, you can get a great sound with either speaker. It's just if you have a chance to audition both, one of them will, no pun intended, speak to you more. Hey, gas station sushi, Eric, formerly of Two Rock. Well, I appreciate that very much. If you don't mind telling us here, what all did you do at Two Rock? That you'd be might have some information the rest of us would really like. Maybe we need to have you on here, as long as it is an amicable thing in terms of formerly of Two Rock. I don't want to stir up any stuff in either direction, but I bet you've got some stories, man. Hey, Captain Grumpus. 2-month-old Groove Tube JJ Stamp 12X7s lost vacuum last week. Was going to buy some spares. Should I stick with JJ? It's hard to say. I've had a lot of JJs in the last couple of years that suddenly lose vacuum. And I don't know whether or not it was a bad batch or a bad period from the factory, as they had to make changes due to maybe they had to get a cheaper glass supplier to get them through the COVID period, because that was really hard on that factory. I don't know the answer, and it's possible that they have since solved that issue. But I would contact, like I keep saying, find a tube vendor that you trust. Depending on where you live, Tube Depot, the Tube Store, Magic Tubes, Euro Tubes. Find a vendor that you like and trust, not tubesandmore.com. They're a good supplier of things, but their tube sorting is not great. Not Guitar Center, not Z-Sounds or Musician's Friend or anything like that. Find a company that what they do is tubes, and call them and say, hey, I need to order some 12AX7s, and I've been concerned that the JJs I had lost vacuum. I've heard that's an issue. They'll say, oh, yeah, we used to have that problem a lot. We had a lot of returns, and since last August, that stopped. Or, yeah, that's still a thing, so we would recommend that you go with this Electro-Harmonics that we have now. Or clients have had really good luck with this Sovtech, or clients have had good luck with this Tube Amp Doctor or whatever. A good tube vendor will know their stuff, and they're going to know what the returns are and the customer complaints have been, because they want to avoid that. So if brand A is giving them less problems than brand B, they'll tell you brand A is a better bet. I cannot tell you whether to stick with JJ, because I don't know the answer to whether JJ has truly fixed that. And if so, a vendor that sells tubes all the time is going to be able to say, yeah, we don't care. That was a bad batch. We don't have any more of them in stock. Whereas someone else would just say, it says JJ, I'll sell it to you. It might be one from that very known bad batch. Kimball, I would have to know what kinds of music you're playing and what stage volume you're looking for before I can give you any recommendations for that kind of thing. So, and didn't you just get a Dr. Z Jetta? I don't know what styles of music you play, so I can't really help you anymore without knowing that. Thanks, Christopher Sambuco. Yeah, the GA40 is done. It's going to go home to Keith this week, and I'm sure he'll do something cool about it. I think we're going to do a live stream at some point to talk about it. I didn't do anything life-changing. It's still the GA40. I gave it the triode switch for the 5789 on the normal channel just to give the amp some more flexibility. And I gave both channels just a bit more high-end, not as much as I would like, but there's no way to make that thing a brighter amp without making it a very different amp. So it is now as good, I think, as a GA40 can get and still be a GA40. I'm looking over there because that's where it is. Sorry, I'm not just... Sorry, I forget that people are watching me sometimes. But it is still an example of what it is. It's just no way to make it a brighter thing without sacrificing gain in other places or introducing negative feedback and stuff. So... Jim B, thank you very much. I don't have any experience with the Ampeg GVT series. Sorry. John Pardo, a glorious afternoon in the West Midlands of the UK. Well, I gotta say, John, I've been really. I sent a text to Jeff McErlane, who's on tour of Czech Republic right now. Sorry, old habits. And I was like, I am so jealous. Hope you're having a great time. I'm having UK withdrawals because I love Memphis, but I have done everything. I've seen everything. And London and Oxford was just so beautiful. And around every corner was some new fascinating thing. And it's, I'm an amateur historian, so I knew most of what I was seeing, or I understood the ramifications of it, and I was reading every blue plaque. But beyond that, Memphis is not a place where we don't have patisseries, we don't have boulangeries. I've got to go to D.C. or New York or St. Louis or New Orleans for that kind of thing. And so the wide range of very good food everywhere in London and even in Oxford is something I've been missing. Even just Greg's, man. You guys don't know how good you have it with Greg's. We don't have anything that good and inexpensive in the United States. So have a sausage roll for me, man. What is the sound difference between the paraphase, not paraphrase, it's paraphase versus long tail pair? A paraphase is going to be a very imperfect balance. You're not going to have as much swing, and it's going to be, you're going to have more harmonic distortion added to it. It was a very primitive circuit. The long tail pair, which is what we find in almost every push-pull amp made since about 1958, and certainly every higher voltage, higher wattage amp has a lot more swing in terms of it drives output tubes more efficiently and harder, but it also stays cleaner and gives you better implementation of negative feedback. And I think the classic implementation of that would be the 58 baseband, which is what I was playing at the beginning of this video. And that's the same thing that you find in Marshall. It's the same circuit with some changes that you find in all the 60s reverb Fenders, that we all know and love. Basically, the only thing better in terms of more efficient is the cathode follower, as you'd find in like an SVT, or as literally sawn out of the back of an SVT and put in a different cabinet, the Dumble steel string swinger, stinger, whatever that thing is. That thing is a really hard alliterative thing to say. Anyway, he's just taking a Dumble the Dumble's just taking the SVT output section with that massive clean cathode follower thing. But for most amps, a standard long-tailed pair, also known as a Schmidt splitter, will do the trick. And it takes the same tube and takes the same number of parts as the paraphase. It just had not been invented earlier. Let's see. When picofarad, Surge98 asks, when picofarad values are required, when do I use a silver mica cap versus a ceramic cap? Is it true that the cheap mica caps sold at many parts distributors are prone to failure? Thanks. Yeah, it is very true. The ones which just say SM tend to be garbage and leak or cause all kinds of noise issues, and it's just not worth spending the money on, even if it's just 75 cents. You can spend for the ones that say CDE. You can spend for the ones that say Sozo if you want. Those are like $7. And for some circuits, maybe there's a slight difference where you might find a silver mica preferable. For a long time, silver micas were viewed as preferable to ceramic because the ceramics were very, very cheap and tend to be very microphonic. Well, we have much higher quality ceramics on the market today than we used to, from either a multi-layered dip thing like a Murata to just a very high quality class 2, 2000 volt rated or 1000 volt rated Vichy, both of which have better performance characteristics than most silver micas and cost a lot less. So in general, I will always go for a ceramic these days, but I don't just go for the cheap generic ceramics. I'm using specific series from Vichy or Murata or a few other brands, Epcos, TDK, etc., with certain specs. And I'm looking for, in some places, I'm looking for near ideal performance where there's just not going to be any temperature changes, not going to be any affected by moisture. And there's some places, like in some guitar amp parts of certain circuits, I want a class 2 that's going to vary with temperature, vary with humidity even, but vary in musical ways, similar to how the old Lemcos did. But at the same time, they're not going to become microphonic, they're not going to become noisy, they're not going to be prone to any failure. So yeah, avoid the silver micas that say SM. But then if you want to order a bunch of Murata 1000 volt and Vichy 1000 volt and CDE 500 volt silver micas and see which ones sound good to you, that's great. And if you consistently hear a benefit to the much more expensive silver micas, go for it. Hey, New York City geology, sorry. Any advice on how to sort out a high E string that gets stuck in my LP binding if my vibrato is too wide? Do I just need a new nut? It gets stuck in the binding? Do you have a gap here between the binding and the edge of the fingerboard? I'm not sure what you're saying. I just can't envision any place where that could happen unless you had a gap between the binding and the fretboard material, in which case you need to take it to a tech, and at the very least they can fill that with some super glue and then make it go away. Oh, if it's between the underneath the fret nib and the binding, as PJ suggests. Yeah, you need to take that to a tech and have them look at that. That could be a lot of things, but typically a few strokes of the right file and then maybe a little bit of clear super glue and then a little bit of polishing, and that problem would go away. You'd never know that the guitar had that problem. But I think I really, I can't more than that from here. But any guitar tech or luthier worth their salt would be able to diagnose that in 5 seconds and fix it for you in a very timely, cost-effective manner, because that's a simple thing. Hey, Natas. Will playing my 75 Super Reverb through a 2x12 4-ohm cab loaded with a Veteran 30 and a DV77 damage the amp? I played for a couple of minutes. It sounds great. No, it won't hurt a damn thing. I'm not sure what the DV77 is. I know the Veteran 30's got a 65 watt rating or 70 watt rating. As long as the DV77 is also rated for more than 50 watts, your Super Reverb can boast to have a 2-ohm load. It can handle a 4-ohm mismatch, no problem. I wouldn't give it an 8-ohm load at any substantial volume, and don't use it with the 16-ohm load. But 2-ohm, 1-ohm in the very unlikely case that that would be an issue, or 4-ohm is totally fine. Yeah, I'm glad that I was able to send you to Dave. Dave does such good work, and so you had the early 70 CTS. Yeah, those things are just phenomenal. But yeah, your Super Reverb will be fine with a 4-ohm load. Hey, Martin Reed. Well, those film caps are not electrolytic, and they don't dry out, and they're self-healing. They're just like a film cap you'd use anywhere else in the amp, only they're very large, so you can get 10, 16 microfarad at 500 volts. There's just not, will they last forever? Sorry, Miss Jackson, no, they won't, but they'll probably last 40 to 60 years or more versus 10 to 20 typically for an electrolytic. They just, the downside is that they are physically huge. They're very expensive and they're not huge in value. So if you needed to have the equivalent of filtering that you'd find in a 100-watt Marshall, you're looking at like $100 worth of caps. It would take up a large amount of space inside the thing versus just 2 can caps. So everything's a cost, performance, and size trade-off with these things. But for a small amp like a car, especially since the buyer of a car is willing to pay for it, those Solon capacitors are fantastic. Hey, Greg Boboski, any experience with hum canceling P90s? I have a lot of experience with hum canceling single coils in general. I have not tried the P90s. I almost did. When I got these Fralins for this, I thought about getting the Fralin humbuckers, and I bet they'd be great. But, you know, I find the right place to sit and... And then in the middle position, it's all gone anyway. I just knew that I wanted this to be as, you know, as authentic as a $700 Chinese guitar could be made to be, with a, you know, everything else has been changed. It's just the wood that I bought, and everything else I've changed pretty much except for the tuners. But these Fralins sound great. Haven't played it in too long. Just on the edge of feeding back with that basement on 3. Sorry, that probably didn't sound great because this chair has got arms, and it's, you know, I don't mean to always make an excuse, but I need to get a chair that has no arms because they get in my way. I'm also still not used to playing sitting down, especially stuff like that. But these pickups sound great. So I'm sure that the Fralins and the Lawler noiseless are really good, and I'm sure that the Kimmins. Actually, no, I did try the Kimmin P90s in that Rev Star. I forgot about that. Yeah, those were really nice. Really nice pickups. A very expensive set of pickups, but very worth it. It was supposed to be the substitute by the Who, but I messed it up. Sorry, Jameson. Yeah, but I imagine I have not tried the Fralins or the Lawlers, but they are said by those guys to sound really good, and those guys know pickups. I know the Kimmins are fantastic, but thicker than a lot, so they're not going to work on every guitar. But I decided, well, I've got 2 Strats that are noiseless. Everything else I can live with a little bit of buzz. And if I think about it and hold the guitar right, which sounds better and is easier to play on a Tele for some reason. But those things just got a punch to them. They have elevated that guitar way past what it was. Kimball mostly plays blues. All right, if you remember, you're asking $1,500 to $2,000. Get a used deluxe reverb reissue and have a local tech do some of the heat-related upgrades I've mentioned and shown in various videos. And if you can't play blues with the deluxe reverb, don't wake up that morning. Hey, Jeff, he's got an AC15 C1. I assume that you mean AC15. You got an A512C1. I imagine AC15C1. And the reverb does not come on until about noon. Having to turn it up to 2 or 3 o'clock to notice any difference. Any idea to bring it in sooner and more noticeable? You probably have a bad reverb tank. The reverb tank in those is a Belton, which is the cheapest of the cheap on the market. Replace it with an MOD or replace it with a Mojotone tank. And you can call Mojotone, you can call tubesandmore.com and say, hey, I've got an AC15C1. Which reverb tank do I need? They'll tell you. It'll cost you maybe $25, $30, so maybe $40, $45 with shipping. If you know how to use a number 2 screwdriver and plug in RCA cables like on a stereo, you can change it yourself. The only caveat is in the AC15C1, it can be a little bit tricky to reach one of the screws on the rear. There are 4 screws which hold the pan down, or hold the bag down. There are 2 in front, which are easy, and there are 2 on the back, and one on the back is really close to the speaker. You just got to have, I use a right angle Phillips head screwdriver for that. So you might have to go to the hardware store, spend $4 to get a small right angle screwdriver for that one screw. But it's most likely going to be your tank because it's a very reliable solid state circuit for the reverb. It's just much less likely for anything to go wrong with the circuit compared to that really cheap, poorly made Belton. Thanks so much, Emilio. I appreciate that. Gracias. Cotton Candy Randy. Sorry, I've not checked my email since last night. As I mentioned before, our internet went down. It went down at 11 o'clock last night. Came on about, I guess, 11:45 this morning. So I have not been looking at emails. In fact, I was worried that I'd have to change, get on my phone and change this to another day or another hour. Is there a Swiss Army knife tube amp out there that exists, one that can do most sounds for rock blues? Yeah, it's called a deluxe reverb. Or it's called a super reverb, or it's called a twin reverb, depending on the stage volume you want and how much you want the clean headroom to be. And then you use pedals beyond that. Go watch Stevie Ray Vaughan live at the Elma Combo. He's got a vibroverb, and he's got a super reverb, and he's got some pedals. And the rest is all on him. But my God, you can also use those same amps and do a Radiohead gig. They're versatile, they're time tested, and you can get a used reissue for relatively little money. When it comes to the twin or the super, you could get a used one from like 1976 for like $800, or you could last time I looked at such prices. Well, Guitar John, I appreciate that, but I don't think I want to work on any more of the 68 series from Fenders if I can avoid it. I've got a lot of work lined up already. If an existing customer also has one of those awful things, I'll work on it for them, but that's not the kind of amp that I have any interest in really taking in. There are so many techs out there who could fix it. The main issue is that none of the problems that amp has, and that's not even one of the bad ones, compared the 68 Custom's not anywhere near as bad as the other 68. The Pro Reverb is actually a pretty good amp. It's got a couple of minor things, but all the other 68 Custom series stuff is, including and the hand-wired 64 stuff, is so bad. It's just embarrassing that Fender puts that stuff out. Just not good. Hey, RJ Electric, Jensen C12N versus some Celestion for a Fender 1x12 combo. Well, an old C12N, original C12N is a fantastic, fantastic thing. If they make one today, I wouldn't really trust it. I would go with the Warehouse G12C, which is their version of the Jensen C12N, or the Jupiter labeled version of the same speaker, which is slightly different, but still essentially a C12N. As far as Celestions for a Fender, it can be a great choice. The Vintage 30 is a fantastic choice with deluxe reverb. If you're moderate on your volume, a Celestian Blue Alnico is a fantastic choice for that too, especially for a Tweed Deluxe, but also a Deluxe Reverb. But the ET65 from Warehouse, the Creamback 65, these are fantastic choices. Even the Neo Creamback sounds pretty damn good, though it's a little bit bright, but the trade-off in weight, and you can turn the treble down on the amp to a large extent. There are a lot of great Celestian or Celestian flavored choices. Eminence has got a lot of great choices too. I mean, we have an embarrassment of good choices these days, which is fantastic, but at the same time, it's hard to choose, especially since it's an expensive thing to buy them and then install them and try them. So most players, they find the first thing that works for them, and they love the first thing that they basically marry the girl, the first girl who said yes. And I'll just leave it at that. So people have hard and fast opinions based on, I didn't like that one, I didn't like this one, this one's the best ever. And they haven't tried the other 30,000 things out there. So I can give pretty, I've had a very high success rate of matching clients to speaker choices once I've heard them play and talk to them a lot. But in terms of, hey, what's the best speaker? What's the best flavor of ice cream? Hey, gas station. Well, I cool a lot of cathode biased amps, but not EL. Put it this way, a 6v6 or EL84, I'm given that the cathode resistors don't go in lots of increments. You have 50, 68, 47, 50, 68, 72, 820, et cetera, 82, 100, et cetera. There's not a lot of gradations. If I can get the thing so that an EL84 cathode biased is drawing between 12 and 14 watts with 120 volts coming out of the wall, I'm happy. If you want to cool it off, that's fine, but I think tonally you lose something, but you're not going to lose. I don't think that 10% is going to affect the tube life. What I do is I increase the screen grid and cool it to no more than 14% dissipation. And a lot of matchlesses come in and they're like 19 watt, 19 watt dissipation, not 14 watt or 12 watt. And they have 100 ohm half watt screen grid resistor, no protection to that screen whatsoever. So I send the same matchless home with a 1K or 2K 2 watt screen grid resistor, and the bias, the idle might be at 13.5, 14 watts. It still sounds like a matchless, but it's not running as hot. It's not melting its faceplate anymore, and the tubes are much more likely to last a long, long time. So I think it's the screen grid in conjunction with cooling the bias, not just cooling the bias. So I think if you cool the bias 90% like you do, and you leave the screen grid stock, I think it's not quite as good as cooling the bias to within the data sheet range and then giving you more screen grid protection. And in theory, you could do both. You could be at 90%, 80%, but I think there's a tonal trade-off at that point. I won't argue too much. If that comes in at, like the GA40 is biased at 11.5 watts. That's where it idles, which is just a little bit under the 12 watts, 100% on the data sheet for those 6v6s. But it sounds good, and I'm not going to go through a whole bunch of 100 ohm resistors to find one that actually measures 95, so I can get it precisely to 12 watts. 11.5 is fine. So gas station sushi, Eric and I are not arguing. We're having, it sounds one-sided because I'm alone with a microphone. It's shop talk. And if we're in person, we can clink glasses and say, yeah, fuck matchless. Would I suggest to add a choke to a twin reverb 135 ultralinear when disabling the ultralinear configuration? No, because I would not recommend disabling the ultralinear configuration. I think there are very few of them left in good shape, and they can be desirable on their own, and they're not bad sounding amps, and I think they should be restored the way that they were. And if you want a non-ultralinear Fender twin, there's a jillion of them out there. Go buy a different twin if you don't want the ultralinear, but leave the ultralinears alone. Let the ultralinears work as ultralinear because it is another cool flavor. And I don't think everything should be blackface. I don't think everything should be made something else. And I don't want to make my Fenders into Marshalls, and I don't want to make my Marshalls into Voxes, and I don't want to make my 70s Fenders into early 60s Fenders. I want them to be a good example of the time capsule that they could be. Does that make sense? Hey, Matt. Yeah, that 1936 EH150, which is right here, that's the oldest one I've had in so far. Before that was a 46 Gibson BR4, BR6, I don't remember. Remembered, made me think of Junior from Hee Haw, BR49 or whatever it was, but maybe I deserve that senior discount. I can't remember the old Hee Haw joke. Yeah, dremeling out charred boards is part of our life there, Eric. Let's see. Rob's restoring a 75 Super Reverb. Are the stock CTS Alnicos worth reconing? Hell yes. If you've got a CTS 10-inch Alnico speaker from the 60s or 70s, that is the best sounding Alnico 10-inch speaker ever made. As a 1.5-inch voice coil, nothing else today is made the same way. You cannot get that sound from WGS. You cannot get that sound from Eminence. You cannot get that sound from Weber. But if you take them to a good reconer, you can have them back in perfect condition, and they're going to sound phenomenal and be the best possible speaker you could ever choose. And my guy charges like $80 per speaker, so it's actually cheaper to get that fantastic old speaker reconed than typically to buy a new speaker. So get in touch with Dave Halford, Halford, halfordloudspeakers.com. He's in Memphis. It takes about 6 weeks for him to do it. He does a phenomenal job. He charges a fair price. He stands behind his work, and I've not had a single bad experience with him. The only caveat, and he'd laugh if I said this, is if you ask him a question about speakers, clear your calendar, because he will tell you. He will talk to you about speakers because he loves speakers and he knows speakers, and he grew up in the world of speakers. His dad used to run speaker services in town. So Dave grew up in that shop with his dad, and he knows speakers, but he will tell you more than you ever thought you could possibly know about speakers. In a good way. He's interesting, but he's one of those guys. Anyway, speaking of one of those guys, I think it's time to take our first BR549. Thank you, Junior sample there on Matthew Arnold. Yep. BR549, Junior sample sales. That's right. We're going to take our first intermission, 7 minutes, and we'll catch everyone back in just a Just a second, guys. Sorry, had to get a glass of water. I know coffee's my shtick, but after a while it starts to constrict. So just give me a second. And that's how you know I have no illusions of being a ventriloquist. If I'd been clever and planned, I could have pre-recorded something to play right there while I was drinking, and you would all have been amazed. Let's see, where were we? Yeah, Eric, sounds like you and I are on the same page, both with the JCM 2000s and the shunt bias method, but it's not something that I want to tell everyone on the internet how to do casually. Hey, Nick Romy, any balanced, any recommended reading for balanced transformer lineouts on tube amps? Seeing basic voltage dividers to complex. Yeah, I don't think there's a really good way to do it without spending as much money and time as you spent on the actual amp. I would think that the better solution these days are all the standalone reactive loads with and without IRs, whether it's the SIR or the Fractal or the Fryette. There's just so much good stuff out there. I think the Fractals start at like $200-300. I think it's probably a better way to do it. Brad is saying he's doing a video on it today. Maybe he means that. There are ways to do it, but to do it really well and transparently is problematic. And you give up a lot. And the issue then becomes, do you want that in addition to or instead of the speaker out? So I don't think there is a really great way to do it. No one ever seems to have done it within the amp very, very well. I cannot begin to pronounce your name there, but am I aware of a 25 microfarad capacitor missing from the top boost circuit in Dallas Arbiter AC30s? Yeah, it's not just the Dallas Arbiters. It started in '67 on the JMIs. They omitted the 25 microfarad bypass cap on the top boost tube. They wanted more headroom, so that's back when I was doing all the JMI Plus mods on everything. That's one of the switches I put on the Custom Classics is the 65-67 switch, which just turned off that cap. So if you want to add it back, add it back. In fact, you don't have to do a 25 microfarad. You can do a 4.7. It'll be a little more optimal for that tube stage. So I haven't changed anything on the amp. This is what a Telecaster sounds like in that 58 Bassman with the added plate reverb. It's a lot lower output than the Casino, so if I change it. It's a lot brighter too, but that's the fun part of all this, is a very flexible amp. I'd be ashamed to see it go. Someday I'll have to roll one for myself. Let's see, where was I? Hey, Scott Christ. Let's see. I have no thoughts on silk tone amps, Eric Neeson, because I've never heard of, let alone tried one. So, is it a good idea to run JJ6V6S's and a 6L6 amp for lower power and more breakup? It won't hurt typically, but you're not going to get any great result from it because the output transformer is still going to prefer a different primary impedance. Yeah, the 6V6S can handle the higher plate voltage and all that, but your heater voltage throughout the entire amp is going to go up because it's not going to be drawing as much through the 6V6s. And the JJ6V6Ss have turned out to be very unreliable tubes in the last few years. So I don't see any plus to it. It's something that you could do and it'd be safe. Why would you want to? That's where we're at. I think Eric there agrees with me. Let's see. Can the tone of the reverb on a tube amp with a reverb tank be darkened and lightened like some reverb pedals have knobs for dark tone and light tone? Joseph Cole. Yeah, you can. You can add a bright cap. You can roll off highs before at the recovery stage or at the amplification stage. You can do all the same kind of tricks to reverb circuit that you do to a guitar signal. It's just that in general, people like one thing, and if you can just get that one thing easily, that's as much time as people want to think about it. There's my reverb, and there's the level, and that's all I need. But yeah, you can go into dwell, and you can go into tone, and you can do all kinds of stuff. One of the things that I see a lot, and I was certainly in this school when I first started out, is when you first get into this and you realize all the things that you can do, you want to do everything in your amp, and you end up with an amp that does everything and has all these beautiful switches, and it's really complicated to build. And a lot of times, because you're just starting out, you're making mistakes in your lead dress or where things are or how things are implemented. You're just trying to do everything, and you end up doing nothing because at best, you've given the owner option paralysis. And at worst, which is very much the case, there are so many ways to make that amp sound bad, so many terrible combinations that never even occurred to you because you thought that everyone's going to do it this way because this is obviously what it was intended to do. So in general, Brad was talking about this yesterday in terms of idiot-proofing things. The world's always inventing a higher grade of idiot. See politics. But as much as possible, try to idiot-proof what you do. Say, hey, this does this sound because this is a sound that I think you really will need and pro players will enjoy. And does it sound like the record that you grew up listening to? Probably not. That's one of the problems we have as amp designers and builders and techs is that people think that there is an amp that sounds like this recording of an amp. You know, I mentioned earlier Stevie Ray live at the Elmo Combo. Well, you can take a super reverb and a vibroverb into that club or whatever building's there now and set them up, and they're not going to sound like Stevie Ray did in that same spot because A, Stevie Ray, B, the mics, the mic pre's, whatever tape it was being recorded to, decisions engineers made. People are like, hey, can you make my amp sound like you too? No, I can make your AC30 sound like if Edge played it, he'd sound like himself. And if you ever got recorded in an Irish castle by Daniel Lanois in 1987, you would be amazed what that amp with those mods sounds like with a C12 8 feet away in a huge stone room. You know, so one of the things we have to do is find a nice way to educate guitar players, to educate the customers, the clients, without letting them know that they're uneducated as they come to us, because it's a slippery slope. You know, I could go over there and rotate that Royer 45 degrees or move it a foot away from the amp, and what you guys hear would be very, very different. Both would be accurate representations of what that amp sounded like in the room to that microphone where the microphone was. So, and how the microphone hears things. Even the Royer is always different from how we hear things. So sometimes it's best just to say, this is really going to be this is what you need, even if it's not what you think you want. But you can make reverb brighter and darker and all that stuff. Yeah, typical 6L6 circuit voltages exceed, say, 6V6 maxes. The JJ6V6S is kind of the exception, and that it can run at voltages usually reserved for 6L6s, but there's no real benefit to it. Hey, Lucas, thank you very much. Can he use a 2x12 8-ohm Fender Princeton with using the speaker in the cab? Yeah, you can. You'd have 3 speakers being run. It'd be a much more sound pressure, so much more volume in the room, and you'd be running a 4-ohm load. And the Princeton was designed for that. Leo designed it. If you're using the internal speaker and the auxiliary, it's going to have a 4-ohm load, even though the secondary on the output transformer is just 8 ohms, and you adjust. That mismatch is fine. You can mismatch 8 to 4. You can mismatch 8 to 16. You really don't want to mismatch 4 to 16 or 16 to 4. So if you have 2, 4, 8, 16, and rarely 32, you can go off by 1. So if you have an 8 ohms, you can go to 4 or you can go to 16. Don't go to 32. Don't go to 2. Sometimes I'll test a super reverb into an 8 ohm cab. So it's a 2 ohm output with an 8 ohm cab. I don't crank the damn thing. I'm not doing it for very long. I'm doing it to test for noise and stuff. If I'm going to do a real playing test, I'll run it into an actual 2 ohm super reverb load, or I'll run into 2 8 ohms at 4, or I'll use a dummy load in conjunction. So for high volume stuff, I always get the impedance much closer, if not exact. But for bench tests, super reverbs, I'll often have a deliberate mismatch. But I'm only testing it at like 2, 2.5 on the volume. I'm not cranking it up to 10. Mick Ronson did play guitar. He played the hell out of the guitar, but so did David. All that 12-string stuff is David, and if you ever played one of those old 12 strings like he had, it was not an easy thing to play. It was not a particularly good guitar, but he sure made it work. Let's see. I have heard of Lado guitars, Lucas Bielinski, but I've not had any experience with them. Let's see. Hey, Joe Camacho, you have a problem with your matchless HC30. It cuts out when master volume is bypassed. You usually use the master assist. Notice this. Can I give you some advice? Yeah, you got a bad connection. The master volume on an HC30 is just a volume pot connected as a variable resistor across the 2 grids. So if it's 250K or 500K, typically 500K, the master volume switches on. It connects a signal from each grid to either side of that pot, actually from the wiper to one side of the pot. So it's a variable 500K resistance from 0 ohms off, 500K full volume. If you have a problem where you flip that switch and it's no longer passing signal or it's cutting out, you probably have a wire shorting out at that switch, because if the two, I don't know how they've wired that switch on yours in terms of how it's physically wired. But if those 2 grids were to contact each other, like if there was a short in the switch itself somehow, you would then have 0 volume, like when you turn your master volume all the way down. So I imagine if I were to open up your amp, I would either see like a little strand of wire, not where it's not supposed to be, that's only touching when it's in the bypass mode, or there's a physical fault within the switch. Switches can fail internally, so you're probably a $5 switch away from a functional amp. Or just even possibly getting there with a toothpick and moving some wires around until you find where it's no longer cutting out. It can't be anything major. It's going to be in the wire or in the switch. Hey, David Hudson, thank you so much. No, we definitely went to Westminster. I'm always trying not to make this whole thing about my trip, but it is so much on my mind. Westminster is one of my favorite experiences on the planet. In 2005 was when I first went to Westminster, and we were at Westminster on a Saturday. And then on the Sunday, the next day, we were in Paris. We took the Eurostar train through the Channel, and we were in Notre Dame well before the fire. And it was very interesting to contrast Westminster, which is very much full of light and air and a celebration of individuals and their accomplishments, not just the politicians, not just the kings and queens, but the poets, the writers, the scientists. And then to go to Notre Dame, which was a very dark, still felt very medieval, very much about death, morality, and heavily mentioned death. And for all the big rose windows, just not a lot of, the light situation was very different. It was a very different worldview. It felt like when you're in Notre Dame, at least before the fire, it felt like you were really back in about 1200 with a very dark worldview. And Westminster was very uplifting. And it's a very moving experience, not just to see, that the poets and writers are given the same degree of accolade as the kings and the statesmen and the prime ministers and the generals, but the tomb of the unknown soldier being given the prime point of honor in the entire cathedral, with the even the king has to walk around it as he comes in the building. You cannot walk over that. And as an American, it meant a lot to me that as you come in the main doors and you turn around on the left, there's a small monument to FDR, and that meant a lot to me. And then now, wasn't there in 2005. I think it went up in 2011. Right above the main doors, they have all these leaders from across the world, but they were all humanitarian leaders and people who made the world a better place, not kings, not politicians, not soldiers. And just above and to the left of the very center, so one of the most important places on the entire facade, is a statue of Martin Luther King Jr. And FDR meant a lot to me as an American. Seeing MLK there in the pride of place meant a lot to me as a human. That was beautiful. And Westminster is just an amazing place to be. I'm a-religious, to put it nicely, though I was raised Episcopalian, raised Anglican. But it is the closest I've ever felt, unless I'm out in nature. If I've been in mountain valleys and streams fishing, and I've felt the same thing. But Westminster is the closest thing I've ever felt in a man-made space to the presence of anything greater than us. And I think in that case, from my perspective, it was the greatness of individual humans and what they can accomplish. And that's everything from, Milton and Isaac Newton to George Eliot to Queen Elizabeth to, FDR, and certainly to MLK. It is just amazing. And also, as an American, when we went to St. Paul's, and behind the main high altar is the American Chapel, which was rebuilt after the Luftwaffe did cause extensive damage to that end of the church during World War II, during the Blitz. They rebuilt that chapel as the American Chapel, and it, in addition to having the Stars and Stripes incorporated into the stained glass and into the floor, there's also a large book listing all the members. Every American soldier who participated in the European theater is listed there, and every day that page is turned to another list of names, and it is really something that takes your breath, and to stand there and really absorb that meant a lot to me, and I highly recommend it to anyone who gets a chance to go, American or otherwise. Back to amps. Lucas asked, what do I think of Rivera quality? I think the quality is really good with Riveras. I think Riveras are a little bit prone to what I was talking about before, where you make so many options available that it's very easy to get bad sounds. I don't agree with all the voicing changes, and some of the things that they do as far as using a lot of transistors for things, I don't think they're all heat synced as well as they could be. But they're not bad quality. They're just not quite as optimal as I would like. I think the biggest downside with the Riveras is that they use a lot of specialty pots, push-pull switch pots, which they custom ordered and not available anywhere else. And so if they cannot get, if you cannot get the part from Rivera, you may not be able to get the actual part that you need. So it's not a quality thing, but it's a specialty thing with a very small company, and you're taking a chance that they still have 3,000 of that original order that they left, you know. But if you like the sound of a Rivera, it's a very safe bet, and they're very well built. And given the time that they came out, they were much better built than the big companies that they were competing with, especially Fender, Marshall, and Mesa. Yeah, the JJ6V6S is not really 6V6, and it's not really 6L6, and it would be fine as an in-between thing, and a useful thing as an in-between thing, if it didn't go microphonic as soon as a speaker was within a foot of it. But they go microphonic so poorly, Eric. I can't use them. I just can't. Hey, Craig Jones. He says, "Hi, Lyle. My Princeton is going to be hand wired next week. What components like caps and resistors would I recommend using, and also are there any upgrades to the circuit that I would recommend?" Well, I mean this nicely. You're taking the amp to someone else to have them hand wire it, and you want me to spend my time telling you what I would do for free. And at the same time, you would then turn around and tell the guy that you are having do the work what this guy on the internet said to do. If you're having it hand wired by a tech, trust them or don't use them. Have them do what they do or don't have them do what they do. But this in-between thing, I'm not going to second guess what he's going to do. I'm not going to tell him what to do. And at the same time, this is not work that I'd be being paid for, so I don't want to spend too much time on this. That said, I have an awful lot of videos on the Princeton out there, and most of the things I cover in terms of increasing headroom in the phase inverter and giving it better node separation are all in those videos. So I'm not being mean about it. I've already given out an awful lot of free information, but you put me in a weird position with that question because I don't want to tell whoever's doing your work how to do their job. They won't appreciate it, and if they're the right person to do the work, they don't need it. And if they need the information, they're not the right person to do your work. I don't know who it is. I'm hoping that they're fantastic, but they won't need my input to fix a Princeton, hopefully. Hey, Michael Fiolka. Yeah, the boost circuit in your Silverface Twin, the master volume pot, the boost is doing something awful that would take too long to get into. The good news is you can just not use the boost circuit because it's terrible. The rest of the master volume pot is fine. It's just a 1 meg pot wired as a volume. So you connect the ground and the input and the output to what the wire is going to the phase inverter input, and you'll have a fine master volume. If yours has that stupid bright cap, leave the bright cap off. Just replace it with a 1 meg pot, and figure out if, I don't remember off the top of my head, if the boost stuff is normally closed or normally open. If it's normally open, just tape those wires off and leave them alone. If someone in the future wants to put it back to boost, they can. But the boost is terrible. But it's a case of doc, it hurts when I do this. Just don't do that. Just use it as a master volume without the boost, without a bright cap, and you're one meg audio taper pod away from happiness. And it can be a $1.50 alpha 3/8 inch bushing, and you'll be fine. Favorite speaker for Princeton Reverb reissue? Again, speaker recommendations. It's like choosing an ice cream for someone. But in general, the Warehouse G10C will be, if not someone's favorite, among their favorites. Now, someone else may prefer something a little bit darker. They are a little more creamy or a little more early breakup. But in terms of what a Princeton is supposed to sound like, that G10C is just phenomenal. And they're like Well, I can't tell you what the price is because I get a dealer rate on those, but I think they're like $70, $75. So fantastic sound, fantastic quality, fantastic price. And I don't get any kickbacks or payment from them to recommend them. I recommend them because they're good. And I use them because they're good. And as a result, I do get dealer pricing, but I don't get any benefit beyond that. I don't buy them for X amount and then sell them to clients for Y amount. So whatever I pay for it with shipping is what my clients pay for it. So I pass that on. I don't want to be in a position of a retailer. I just want to be in a position of someone who can be trusted to do the heavy lifting stuff. I let everyone else sell stuff. Yeah, Greg's, man. I miss the sausage roll, and I miss the steak bake and the chicken bake, and the ability to, hey, let's grab breakfast. It's gonna be 3 pounds for both of us. I mean, there's just nothing of comparable quality and low price in the States. And if Greg's were to open up here, I think they might have some in some parts of the U.S. starting, but it needs to go national because it was so damn good. No offense to Eric. Imagine if gas station sushi was good. Greg's is that mythical thing. Ziggy Sawdust. Let's see. You're one an amp with 25 watts or less, Kimball says. He mostly plays blues and blues rock. He'll be using pedals with it. Reverb and tremor not necessary, nor is an effects loop. We're describing a deluxe reverb again. It's 22 watts. Whether you use the tremolo or reverb is totally up to you, or you can use the normal channel if you want to have none of that added to it. There are, the Sur Bella would also be a great choice. I think it's closer to 40 watts. The Sur Ombre is a great choice, but it has very little headroom and has a lot of mids. It's very much a Brown 62 deluxe sound, and it is not at all clean. It's not a clean amp. It starts at raunch and then goes to early ZZ Top Records territory. But if you're looking for something that can do a really nice clean and then still have the ability to take pedals well, or if you turn it up, it'll go raunchy. It's almost like, everyone likes the deluxe reverb, so I don't want to like the deluxe reverb. It's like everyone loves the Beatles, so I'm going to shit talk the Beatles. I mean, at some point, you just got to grow up and say, no, the Beatles were really good. The same way Mozart was really good. The same way not the same way. A deluxe reverb is just a thing. It's not one of the great human minds of all time, like a Mozart or that time period for the Beatles. But, a deluxe reverb is a really good thing, regardless of the machinations of the current form of Fender Musical Corporation and all that stuff. As a thing which exists in the world, a deluxe reverb's it's half the thing you hear in your head if someone says, what does electric guitar sound like? Half of it's deluxe reverb, the rest of it's going to be a Marshall of some sort. And you get a deluxe reverb with one of these of some sort, and then you're closer to the Marshall sound. The deluxe reverb is just really good. Find a used reissue, have it brought up to spec, or buy a kit, or look into various companies that are making reproductions of them, whatever you want to do. I don't care what brand is on your deluxe reverb, but if it's a good implementation of a deluxe reverb, that's like Amp 101. It's like, this 58 basement here is not something that most people can have. I can't have it. I just have it here for a little while. But, with a few pedals, it just sounds perfect. That's what we think of as guitar amp. Now, that might be a little bit bright for you guys because I had it EQ'd for the casino earlier, but that's just a quick move of the treble knob. I'm just not walking over there to do it right now. Certain amps just have that thing. The 58 Bassman has that thing in spades, but the cost of entry is much higher and it's much heavier, much louder and larger. Deluxe reverb is just one of those perfect things. So, let's see, where were we? I have not worked on any Hampstead Artist amps. I have not had any experience with or knowledge of Hampstead amps. I hope they're good, but I don't know anything about them. Let's see. Cotton Candy Randy, no. Sorry, I will not be working on any more Blues Juniors unless a long-standing client also has one. But I would recommend not having a brand new Blues Junior. Don't buy a Blues Junior. If you have one, sell it while it's working and get an amp instead, because it's going to fail. And as great as it could be, there's no possible level of greatness to a Blues Junior. You can make it slightly less likely to catch on fire. That's all you can do. It'll be quieter, tubes will last longer, and it'll less likely to catch on fire. But eventually, those sockets will fail. They will start to arc. The failures will cascade. It is not a good platform. It is not a good concept of an amplifier, and I won't help someone spend money on it. I'm sorry. And Joe Camacho, I'm not singling you out. This is for everyone. If you ask a question, Joe's is not the first, but it's the most recent. Please only ask them once, because when I see the same question over and over again, it makes it hard for me to know, because this thing wants to scroll on me, and it's hard to keep up with where I'm at in the chat. So if I see the same question, I'll have to spend time to say, wait, have I already been here? Did it scroll up again? No, this is a new section that's the same question twice. It's a little bit tricky. So, hey, Gooden, which types of phase inverters lend themselves particularly well to integrating a master volume circuit and which do not? Considerations. Well, pretty much all phase inverters except for the paraphase will work really well with a master volume, typically a Larmar, but you can also do pre-phase inverter. Depends on where the distortion characteristic in the amp is coming in. I would say that of the various types, the long-tailed pair and the Ampeg variant with the cathode followers are the best versions. The paraphase is certainly the trickiest, though, as I showed, it's doable, but it's still not as transparent in the paraphase as it is in the long-tail pair, because the circuit itself is not transparent. So in a paraphase, it's a dirty sounding circuit. It's an imperfect circuit, and so transparency is not really possible. You're gonna notice differences. But what I gave in that video and the schematic is as close to transparent as you can get with that. And a cathodine's kind of in the middle of the two. The other version, the two main variants would be like the Marshall pre-phase inverter master from the JCM800, which can also be installed on Plexis, but on Plexis it just neuters the amp. But on amps which have a lot of preamp gain, you can just turn down the master right before the phase inverter, and then then the present circuit works the same throughout the entire range of the master volume. So there can be a reason to have a pre-phase inverter master volume, because it's going to keep the effects loop, the phase inverter and the negative feedback circuit with like near resonance or presence all working the same regardless of the master volume level. It can also be beneficial to have both pre and post phase inverter master volumes that work in conjunction with each other independently, or you can even, if you had a 3-gang pot, you could do it with one. Better to break it up. That we could have a little bit here and a little bit there and find magic transparency. There's also the phase inverter master volume used in a high watt, like a DR104, which is very different and kind of weird in the way the present circuit gets involved. And but again, that is a clean amp. That circuit would not sound very good with a lot of other amps. Thank you, man. I appreciate that. I'm always down with some Outcast. I'm much hipper than I look. I know I look like old white dude, and I get called that by people who disagree with my opinions on things that they don't know what they're talking about. But yeah, I'm not old and set in my ways. I'm precociously set in my ways. Her School Color says, any issues with using a reactive load attenuator with an amp that already has one built in? Also love no reverb sounds, Radiohead. I might be wrong, Hunting Bears, etc. Yeah, I love amps. I love playing amps without reverb, and I'll do it all the time, but I know that people aren't used to it, aren't used to hearing it. So when I'm doing a video that's really reviewing an amp, I'm not going to have reverb on that if the amp doesn't have reverb. In this context, it's fine if I turn it on because I can also turn it off. Let me turn the treble down while I think about your reactive load question. I have not run into that because it would not occur to me to do that. But yeah, if you had an amp that had a built-in reactive load that could not be bypassed, and I would not want to run both at the same time, because they'd be in parallel, you'd have impedance issues. Might be a problem with one drawing more power than the next, but I don't know for sure. So anyway, here is this with reverb. And then if I turn off the reverb, but yeah, I just totally forgot how to play the Radiohead song I was thinking about. No pedals. So I was not, in the entire time when you were hearing reverb on this before, I was not hearing any reverb in the room. That's all in post, and I'd have to put on headphones to hear that. But I play these amps without reverb all the time, and I'm used to it, and I know what it sounds like to the Royer, and I trust that. But if I can add a little Abbey Road plate reverb for this kind of situation, I don't think it'll disguise the amp, but I think it'll kind of ease people into hearing. It still is not going to have delay on it, and I'm not adding a whole bunch of pedals to it. Most channels, like here's my clean sound. It's like compression and EQ and delay and modulation and reverb, and it's never really clean. And it's like, wow, you're always playing in like some huge space that doesn't exist on this planet. I like things that sound like they're on the earth in a room, so. And that wasn't aimed at you, Her School Colors. Obviously, if you're into Radiohead, you're cool like me. But yeah, I would not want to use two reactive loads at the same time unless I spoke to both manufacturers and made sure that they were fine. Let's see, I'm now to the point where people are asking about sounding, substitutes. So I guess that was 45 minutes ago plus. I'm never going to get caught up on these questions, but I'll keep trying. Amp for worldwide use. Would it hurt safety code to put a second fuse with half value in series of the first fuse by switching from 120 to... Well, whichever fuse is lowest is going to blow first. So, Sebastian, I don't think what you're describing would work really well, because if the amp needs to have a 2 amp fuse in the States and a 1 amp fuse in the rest of the world, sorry, Mr. Walking there, if you were to have a 1 amp fuse in series with a 2 amp fuse in the States, it'd have 1 amp would be the limiting factor. It would blow. You could, there are ways around it, but the simple thing is just just change the fuse when you change countries. It's really not a big deal to change fuses. You're only going to be changing the mains fuse. All the secondary fuses are going to stay the same. Either that or just keep it always at 120 or always at 240 and use a step-up transformer, and the transformer will have its own fuse. I have no experience with Wizard amps. I've heard they're not great from other techs, but I don't have any experience with that myself. Sorry, Wambaro. Do I recommend using a Dr. Watson Lion Tamer on a Blues Deluxe? I have no idea what that is, but Dr. Watson historically was wrong about everything. So hold out for the Sherlock Tamer, not the Watson Tamer. Do I have much experience with the Tone King Imperial? Just got one and love it, but haven't really found much information on reliability. I have no experience with the current version of the Tone King Imperial. The Tone Kings that I have had, the Tone King Imperials that I have had, were back when Bartell was making them, as opposed to today when it's BAD, boutique amp distribution thing. I have hopes that the current BAD version of the Imperial is phenomenal, but I don't have any direct experience with them. I've had experience with the Sky King, and you can look at the videos. They had a pretty big flaw, which I found, but they were really good about fixing that flaw, and not just for my customer, but for other customers going forward. So I have great hopes that that company is doing everything right and is really committed to making really great amps. But I would have to have a larger sample size before I can really say anything good or bad about them. PJ is looking at a Celestion HCB. I don't know what that is for DSL40 CR. Need a tighter response. I guess that's H Creamback. I would not suggest that either. If that's what it is, I would not think the the Creamback 65 or 75 would give you a tighter response. Both of those have pretty full low end. You might want to look into like a G12H30 for a tighter response, but I'd have to, I have not tried them in that cab, so I'm not sure how they would respond in the DSL40 CR cabinet. All right, Chris McKinney says the Lion Tamer is just a volume knob that sits in the FX loops. Yeah, it's fine. It's the same. It's just a 10K or 100K volume pot in a box that's put in the loop of a hot rod or a Blues Deluxe. It's no big deal. If you can't build one yourself, I wouldn't spend money on the Lion Tamer or anything like that because you don't know what parts they're using. I know that JHS Pedals makes a version. Just get the JHS one because you're at least going to be getting something of known quality with a company that'll still be in business. If you have a problem, they can support it. There's probably 30 guys on Reverb or Etsy selling the same thing. It's a box with an input jack, an output jack, a 10 or 100K audio taper pot, and a knob. You can build it yourself if you know how to solder and drill things. But if you need to buy one, go with JHS's version because they're at least going to be around a year from now to say, oh, I'm sorry you're having problems. We'll take care of that for you. As opposed to, I don't do that anymore. It's good timing. Dylan Martin, thank you very much. Thoughts on Bartell's amps, the design, layout, and thought put into them look great. I've only seen them. I have not heard one or seen one in person. I've only seen photos. I have been members of various amp forums over the years, though I've not had time to be on many of them lately. But Mark was on one with me, and I have seen a lot of his work, and he does phenomenal work. And I have not played one, and I've not had one on the bench. But at a certain point, you can look, when you've been doing this long enough, you can look at an amp and know that that looks like just every, attention has gone to every possible detail. I bet that sounds fantastic. And from what I can see of the circuit, without reverse engineering it from photos, that should be fantastic. And I would be shocked if Mark's amps don't just make all our panties drop if we ever got a chance to play them. I think he's building at an exquisite level. The only issue is whether any of us could afford that exquisite level of quality. I say this not out of conceit. I am capable of delivering that same exquisite level of quality, but it is rare to find a client who's willing to pay for that. And Mark has come at this from the other direction. Rather than finding clients who want amps and then trying to convince them to let him build Rolls Royces, he's building Rolls Royces, and the people are finding their way to him, which is a risky proposition. I hope it works out really well for him. I do things, let's put it this way, I think I realistically build above the quality level necessary for it to last and for it to be well executed and to be a thing of beauty. He goes above and beyond that. I mean, he's got CNC machines where he can make his boards so that they all have the same beautiful angles to everything, and he machines little standoffs for one wire to pass through here and another wire to pass through here, and it's precise height off the board. I mean, it's like NASA stuff, but there's a price tag that comes with it. So I think Mark does fantastic work. I don't know whether it's necessary, but I personally am glad that that kind of level of stuff exists. Hey, Joe Camacho, I appreciate the super chat, but as you discovered, I answered your question almost an hour ago, I believe. So again, to those watching, if you ask a question and it seems like I haven't gotten to it, I'm about 45 minutes behind where the chat is. By the time I see your question, I will answer it. You might have asked it several more times. I'm really not waiting until you give me a super chat before I answer it. If you give me a super chat, I appreciate that. It helps me run everything here and buy coffee and buy cameras and make everything look better, hopefully, and sound better for you. But I will answer the question as I come to it. And even if you give it a super chat, I see on one screen when a super chat comes in, but I'm not scrolling down immediately to find it. Other channels do that, but other channels have an assistant, or a producer who'll pop that stuff on the screen for the talent to notice. I'm running the whole show myself, so I go in order that they're asked. At the end, before I wrap up, I will make sure there aren't any unanswered super chats, but other than that, I answer them in the question, in the order they come in as much as possible. So I try to be fair. So we're now to where I was when I took the last break. Yeah, Natas, Dave Halford can definitely talk speakers. Hey, Wes, sorry you showed up just in time for intermission. Hey, Sean Weatherford. By the way, Brad had a great video. Brad's Guitar Garage here had a great video drop yesterday on a Mesa 2C Plus Mega Ultra OK thing, and he showed how even the better Mesas were never really built that well to begin with. Shh, don't tell anyone. But he's got a cool video on it. He's going to make it really good. It's possible. Check it out. Drop a link to your video, Brad, so when this is done, they can all go look at what you've been doing on that Mesa, because you've really been doing good work, and most importantly, he also shows how previous techs had just done terrible work, and it's painful to watch what people end up paying for. Hey, 2500 BC says he's got some amps that have not been on for 10 years. Should I bring them up slowly on a Variac? If so, how low, how slow did I make the triad pedal? Well, I'll start with the easy part first. Yeah, I used to make the triad pedal. I used to make the tailless pedal in the 3.14. I may have a last batch of triads, not triads, the Telos. I need to talk to Mr. Brian Meter about getting those out. But I'm not going to be doing pedals again in the future unless some company wants to license some designs. But in terms of the amps that have not been on for 10 years, I would really recommend that you take them to a tech if you can. If you can afford to have a tech, because just to do a quick diagnostic on each one would not be that expensive. Second of all, before you do anything, open them up and physically look at the caps. Make sure you don't see any electrolytic leaking from the caps or any large bulges or anything that looks like cauliflower or the chest burster scene from Alien. Give it a visual inspection. And then if I were to bring it up on a Variac, I'd bring up on a Variac and at least a light bulb limiter, if not a full current limiter, or a current meter we can see when it's rising too fast, as Brad does. And I would start at like 10 volts AC, and maybe every minute I'd bring it up 10 volts AC. And it can take a while. In general, some of those amps are going to need to be recapped. Some of them may still be okay. But I would, especially on an amp that's worth doing all that. All right, 10 volts, wait a minute. 20 volts, wait a minute. 30 volts, wait a minute. So it can take, 15 minutes before it comes up to 120. It's worth it. And you're watching the light bulb limiter, and hopefully you're physically watching the amp, because sometimes caps explode, and you want to be there before that happens, because before that cap explodes, you're going to see all of a sudden the current say, hey, that bulb went from very dim to it's getting pretty bright. All of a sudden, shut it off. Mountain Dew come out of the faucet. No, we've got water. I drink it occasionally. Hey, Doug Romero, thank you very much. Is there a better, more versatile amplifier than a Princeton Reverb? Yeah, Deluxe Reverb. And beyond that, a Super Reverb. But a Princeton Reverb is smaller and quieter and used to be cheaper. So, a Princeton is a fantastic amp. I think that the Deluxe Reverb's got the edge on it, both in terms of having more headroom, and when it does go dirty, it goes dirtier in a cooler way, I think, but it's subjective. But, it also depends on who's playing it. I'm going to have better luck with a Deluxe Reverb. But, Dean Parks has always done all right with this Princeton. So my money's on Dean Parks, regardless of what amplifier or direct or just, heard from across the room, unamplified. Go with Dean Parks over me anytime. That's not going to be news to anyone, I don't think. Let's see. Hey, Mr. Clint. C.R. Loy. I just love the Groucho glasses, man. Have I had a chance to investigate the 63 non-reverb service line? Yeah. Okay. I see what your question is. Sorry. Yeah. The funny story on that amp just needed a pair of 6v6s, so ordered a pair of 6v6s. In the meantime, another amp that another client had, we just bought 6v6s for. It came in, and one of those 6v6s failed, brand new. So the pair that I was going to install in that 63 and the other guys sing, and I contacted the vendor, and they had changed out the 6v6s. And so the new 6v6s were going to go in the 63, and then another client came in with another pair, turns out that we had 3 bad pairs of 6v6s in a row. So it's not the vendor's fault. It's the manufacturer's or the distributors. So anyway, on Monday, when I go to get the new 6L6s to finish up your Super Reverb, Clint, I'm picking up yet another pair of 6v6s, fingers crossed, so I can finish that 63 non-reverb deluxe. But having played it with functional tubes, it sounds really good. It just doesn't have the same drive character, and it doesn't have the same high-end response, airiness of the reverb model. It sounds good, but it sounds really good. But in general, I like the sound of the reverb circuit better. But the non-reverb circuit is slightly quieter in terms of a noise floor because it doesn't have the 3 meg bypass with the 10 picofarad, which is just a way of, you're going to, when you have that high pass emphasis, high frequency emphasis in conjunction with a very large resistor, you're going to get a little bit of noise, but it's so slight that most people never notice it. I think it's time, top of the next hour. So we are going to, let's see, where's the button I'm looking for? We're going to take our next intermission, and I'm going to remember to do this before I do the intermission, because usually I remember to do this only when we come back from the previous intermission. And then it becomes cliche where I say, I always forget to do this, but then I always remember to do this here. So now I remember to do this before. But seriously, if you knew the pressure YouTube puts on content creators to subject you guys to ads every few minutes, I mean, we've been doing this for 2 hours now. We're going to go another hour. YouTube thinks that you should have already watched 12 ads after the one at the beginning, and that you either watch ad, or you pay them for premium. I pay for premium just because I'm on here and I can't deal with the ads. I have to watch videos to check out, not the competition, but to, I'm doing it legitimately. A lot of the videos I watch are for research. I don't subject you to all that stuff, and I make a lot less money on my videos than other channels make on theirs because I'm not just doing ad. So if you guys could recommend my videos to your friends, that really does help. And I don't talk about this in every video. I've got that one graphic that comes in at the 30-second mark on every video. Please like and subscribe. That's all I do. I don't constantly smash that like button, blah, 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 blah. And don't forget to hit the bell notification, blah, 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 because you all know that script. You guys all know that crap. I don't need to tell you that. But occasionally I'll say, hey, it really would help. I would appreciate it. I appreciate you all for being here as a subscriber. Please don't forget to like. If you watched some other videos of mine this week and if you didn't hit the like button, if you wouldn't mind going back and hitting the like button, it helps. Hey, if you think you've got a friend who'd like this kind of stuff, let them know. Because, it's nice the monies that I do get in without fully whoring myself out and making you guys watch a bunch of ads all the time. So help us find the right balance. See you guys in 7 minutes. And we are back. Christopher Westland. Wow, thank you very much. Appreciate that very much. There's no question. Hopefully you have a question. I'll be glad to answer a question. 30 seconds to pee. 5-minute run through a hoot tune. Not sure what you mean, but okay. Okay, Major. Thank you. Yeah, I've certainly played substitute better than that. I just some days my hands don't wake up with the rest of me. I get, I think I've got the beginning of arthritis. These joints are just messed up today. If everything hurts and my hands feel not numb, just slow. But man, my A chord sounds awesome through that 58 Bassman. Feature creep, yeah, that's a good one. Do I ever buy basket case amps and rebuild them just to flip them? I imagine it'd be a nice money maker. Well, I've done it once, and I haven't gotten around to doing anything with it. I bought a very rusted Super Reverb from 1966 for like $150, just the chassis. And I'd planned on taking it all apart and getting all the rust off the way I did to that other Super Reverb, sorry, that Bassman. I just haven't gotten around to it. I might do that at some point, or I might just steal the transformers and various parts from it. I don't know. I always have half the time at best that I think I'll have. So, try not to burp on everyone. Sorry. Let's see. Let me take that off while I find the next thing to pop up here. Yeah, that's the thing. Like Brad says, Swiss Army knives aren't a good knife. They're not a good pair of scissors. Not a good screwdriver. They're not a good toothpick. They're terrible boomerangs. Let's see. What books do I recommend for learning more about tube amps? So I talked about that a little bit, Sun Tzu. All the Jack Dar stuff is out there in the public domain. The tube receiving manual V4 is out there. Merlin Blinco's stuff, valvewizard.co.uk. There's a lot of good stuff out there, and people keep asking us, and Brad and I have been meaning to make a video between the two of us on this, and everything just keeps flying at us. It's hard to find the time. And we have a lot of good ideas, individually and collectively, but getting around to them is the trick. Dennis Flock says, thinking of mixing speakers in a silver-faced twin, Celestian Gold, and a Neo Creamback. Any thoughts? I don't think that would be it might be fantastic. I don't think that would be, just as far as the ingredients go, I'm not sure that's a good recipe because they're doing very different things. The Gold is going to have a lot of mids, and the Neo is going to be very scooped, and you might find them at cross purposes to each other. But if you have the speakers, try it out. I just think they're going to have very different sensitivities and very different frequency responses. It might sound great mic'd individually, but in terms of what that cab sounds like in a room, might be a push me, pull you. Yeah, small signal design is important to know, Sun Tzu. It's just so hard to, what's the best way to put it? Learning this stuff is literally like eating an elephant. One bite at a time sounds easy, but you got to know which end to start at and which bits to avoid. Some bits you'll want some ketchup. Have I ever designed a pedal that digitally controls an analog circuit? No, I haven't, but people do that all the time with Arduinos and stuff. It's certainly much easier to do now than it ever has been, but I have not wanted to have digital controls of an analog circuit myself, but it's very, very possible to do. Let's see. Death, 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 and exit through the gift shop. Yeah, that's exactly right. Thank you, Andy, 1966. I appreciate that very much. And I'm glad that you like my channel. I try to put good stuff up. There's been not a lot of stuff up this week. I've reposted the 2 videos on this because there was such a huge delay to get the speaker and transformer situation sorted out. And I figured if I just put up the last video on this, people were like, part 3 of what? Or they'd be discouraged. They looked and saw the other 2 were last December. That's a really long time frame. Usually my amps don't take that long, but getting the stuff for this one has been tricky. So anyway, I reposted those. And Joe Restivo is coming over Monday or Tuesday with a 1936 ES 150 Gibson that matches this, and he knows how to play the Charlie Christian stuff. So I'm going to set up the ribbon mic a suitable distance away and try to give you guys some actual guitar history. And that'll be the 3rd part on this where you get to hear it, and you'll get a chance to see it a little bit better than in the previous videos because my camera work has gotten better since then too. Thank you, John Pardo. Yeah, I guess you're talking about when I was talking about Westminster and St. Paul's, but yeah, I think an awful lot of Americans still get it. It's not really something that's fruitful for me to talk about on here, but it's so hard for me not to sometimes. So if basic human decency and respect for intellectual accomplishment actually leaks out of me from time to time. Oops, I'm busted. Sorry. And I'm glad to see that it's the majority recently in the UK as well. 14 years you guys suffered. 14 years. Randy Stepp says, I'm very curious about the Electro Harmonix MiG-50 reissue. I tried one, thought it rocked, gut shot looks good to me for the price. Is it the Bassman clone sleepers? I think it is. Well, it's not a Bassman. It's kind of Marshall 1987, kind of Marshall JTM45. It's an odd amp to me in that the original MiGs were all built with Soviet military surplus parts, including form factors for capacitors and valve sockets and switches and stuff that we've never used in the West. So when something needs to be replaced, it's very, very difficult to replace on the old Sovtek MiGs. And so the Sovtek MiG often sounded really cool, but it was a really cheap copy of a Marshall circuit done with really obscure parts. Now Electro Harmonix has bought the rights to make the MiG, and they are copying the copy of a Marshall using standard Western value components and spec stuff. At the same time that has happened, where Marshall was here and Sovtek was here, and then now, but the Sovtek was made with weird stuff. Electro Harmonix is building the Sovtek with good stuff. Marshall's quality has declined, so it's very possible today that the EH version of the copy of the cheap copy of the Marshall is better than the current version of the Marshall. But I've not tried the EH MiG-50. I've not had one on my bench, so I cannot speak to its quality. I would say that it is highly likely to be better than the Marshalls today. I don't know how it compares to, say, the Seriatone version, and I would be surprised if it was as good as some of the comparable models of Friedman, because Dave's really knocking that stuff out of the park. But it's well worth checking out if the sound and price works for you. I cannot tell you definitely go for it because I have not been inside one. I don't know if there's any shortcuts that they're taking that are going to bite the hand that feeds them, so to speak. But I imagine they're a better bet than the stuff that still says Marshall on it. Hey, Martin O'Neill, I'm glad the AC15 is working out for you. It's a really nice amp. Any pedals, especially overdrives, to recommend to go with it? Thank you. Well, that's a really deep subject, and I don't know what your tastes are or what kinds of music you want to do. In general, most players will probably be, if not completely happy, it'd do them good to spend some time with something basic like a Boss Blues driver that you can buy for like $75, I think. I would not recommend any of the really cheap stuff on Amazon or whatever that's like $20 because it's just not going to last. But, you know, anything Boss makes is going to hold up. I don't play around with a lot of overdrive pedals because it's not a world I find particularly interesting. I rolled some for myself. Whether I end up using them long term, I'm not sure because some of the digital stuff is really, really good on that. Keith Williams and Dave Barber are sending me a 5-watt World bus pedal to review for the channel. Now, by which I mean they're going to send it to me. I'm going to show how it's built. I'm going to show what it sounds like. I'll give my objective opinions on that, and I'll give my subjective opinions. But most importantly, I'll let people hear it. Because I was telling Keith that while he talks about the pedal an awful lot, it doesn't appear in his videos. People don't get a chance to hear it very often. So I think people need to hear it, and I'm set up to make that happen with some really good players, and I'm set up to record. At which point, I will either send it back to him, or I will buy it. So I want you to know that even though I know Keith and we're friends, when he sends me a pedal for review, I'm not just going to take the shit in exchange for doing a review or getting paid to do the review. It's not going to be a paid review. And while I'll be cordial if I find something wrong with it, I'll let Dave and Keith know. But you know, I don't expect I will. Dave Barber knows this stuff. But you know, it's going to be an honest review. But I'm not going to get paid for it, and I'm not getting a free pedal for it. But that's another one which I think might be a good option for a lot of players. It should be very versatile based on what I know of it, but I've not tried it yet. But in general, with a Vox, any overdrive pedal that's not just focused on a mid-range hump that can do a cleanish overdrive as well will be a good choice. And I think the Blues driver will probably be the starting point of quality at a lower price. Hey, Mark, no, I don't want to put together kits because then I'd have to answer tons of questions about kits and why I chose this and how to, and you know, if you sell a kit, people are going to want you to support how to build it, and I just can't play that game. I don't have time. I'm sorry. I just don't. I'd have to hire someone to do support, and 90% of that would be them coming and asking me a question that I have to then stop and answer, and I just don't. Not a good use of my time. Thank you, Kimball, for that. I see. I appreciate that. That's very kind of you to understand. Yeah, we have the time that we have is the time that we have, and I give 3 hours a week on these live chats as much as I can, but that's about all the free I can give out. And yes, I get paid for this. Technically, I get some small amount of ad revenue, and I get varying degrees of super chats, which I always appreciate. But this is not a money-making venture to do this. This is 3 hours kind of giving back as much as I can. Tom K1TL. I mean, I wish you guys had usernames I could pronounce better. Tom K1TL. I put a Warehouse G10C in his Princeton, worth the bucks. Yeah, they're fantastic speakers. I'm glad it worked out for you. Let's see. Yeah, I like the Raging Cajun, Christopher. I think it's a bit forward on the attack for some sounds, but it's a good one. I like the for some playing styles in a deluxe reverb, that Texas Heat's really nice too. But the Texas Heat's very kind of an aggressive Brad Paisley kind of thing, which for the right player is fantastic. See ya, Andy. Thank you, Van Shank Guitars. I don't have any thoughts on the Epiphone Custom Blues 30 because I have never had any experience with that. I will say overall, none of the Epiphone branded amps of the last 50 years, 30 years, whatever, have been worth messing with. I'm not sure when they started making Epiphone branded amps again, but while I've not tried the Custom Blues 30, all the other Epiphone amps that come out in the last 20, 30 years have been bad jokes, and I'm sorry that people have wasted their money on them. As many problems as I have with Fender as a corporation, Gibson is by far the worst offender, at least primarily in the various sub companies that they run. Any deluxe reverb kit recommendations? I'd probably Mojotone. I don't know all the kits offered out there. I would never recommend Weber kits for anything. And I know that the transformers that Mojotone uses are Habor's and are very, very good. I don't know if Allen Amps does a deluxe reverb kit, in which case that would be another great contender. But I don't think in terms of kits. If I want to build a deluxe reverb, I know all the things I want. And like Brad said, though I didn't read it out, I know exactly what I want to go in a deluxe reverb, and I know how to put it together myself. But knowing what Mojotone puts in their kits, that is all acceptable stuff, even if there's some things I think are not as good as what I would use. And if you see my buddy Keith Williams' video where he built a Mojotone kit, though he did have the help of a mutual friend, I know him as well, Dan Lurie, who really knows what he's doing. Dan held his hand through some of the trickier bits. If you contrast the amp that you see that Keith built with Dan, that deluxe reverb, versus the first video of the Keith built amp on this GA40, you can see why. And to say this nicely, Keith reaches out to me and to Dan to help him get these things working really well. And Dan helped Keith do a fantastic job on that deluxe reverb. And that was the Mojotone kit, and he, with some help and guidance from Dan, he executed it very well. But that said, he mixed up the 1 meg and 100 ohm resistors and had the 1 megs on the heater balance and the 100 ohms on the input sockets, the input jacks, and as a result, they're really noisy with a very low signal level. So you gotta, even if the kit's perfect, you have a responsibility to say, yeah, I'm going to measure these to make sure that I didn't just. There are a lot of ways you can mess up in building an amp, and you can get frustrated, and you can blame a kit or blame a supplier. But we've all been there, putting a 47K resistor instead of a 47 ohm resistor, or vice versa. When we start doing this, we all make that kind of mistake, and the frustration level can be very high, can be disproportionate to reality, and it's very easy if you have bought a kit and there's a mistake for you to want to blame the company that made the kit, that sold the kit. And so that's one of the other reasons I would never want to sell kits to people, because the customer is always what? This is a very, building apps is difficult. It's a very fraught thing, and people think, oh, anyone could do it. No, if anyone could do it, I wouldn't have a job. And so there's a lot of deflection. Keith didn't do any of this. Keith knows what's up, but there can be a lot of unwarranted anger in this field at stupid kit maker. One color stripe difference. They should paint them different. No, you should have measured them. But anyway, I'm way off on a tangent. Yeah. I was in Poet's Corner and was looking up at the vaulting, put out my hand to stay myself. I was holding on to Chew. I'm not sure. But yeah. it's a really remarkable space, David, to be, and it's it is so removed from our daily existence to be in places that, just from a historical perspective, I would describe as hallowed. I'm not religious, and regardless of whether it's a cathedral or not, I've been in a lot of cathedrals that I'm just like, yeah, it's interesting architecture. But there are some spaces that I feel are transformed or transformative, and certainly transcend their intended function. And Westminster and St. Paul's, I feel are both at that level. And maybe that will be dismissed as Anglophilia, but there are. I have not been to Chartres. I'd love to. Saint-Chapelle in Paris gives me that same experience of this is a remarkable space to be in, whereas Notre Dame never did. Saint-Germain-des-Prés had that feeling, which Notre Dame never did. Saint-Eustache in Paris, I thought was an amazing building from the outside, but the inside was just a big empty space. It didn't have whatever that transformative factor is. Sorry, y'all got me waxing philosophic. It's not all amps around here. Because, my God, if this was all amps and guitars, I'd lose my interest so fast. Brad, I felt that in the Rockies, and I felt that in the Smoky Mountains, and I felt that in the Cumberlands, and I felt that in the Ozarks. To be in a river valley at dawn, and you look and you see that the fog is coming down the river, and you're down at the river, and it's cold that time. Height of summer, it's so cold that time of morning. As the cold wind comes down from the mountains or comes from the base of the dam, and it's just you and the blue herons in the mist. And then at some point, the sun just burns all that fog away instantly, and the world transforms, and all the animals come alive, and all the birds sing, and the sound changes. The sound of the river changes. These things are important to experience. And we need these times away from, I've got to go to the grocery store, and then I got to pick up the dry cleaning, and then we're got to go out and look at floor tiles tonight. We had to go to freaking Walmart last night in the rain because Nikki had to buy supplies for one of her class projects, and that was the only place that had everything on the list. And we never go to Walmart. I don't like giving them a dime. But, I'm sitting there in the freaking Walmart parking lot thinking, I was at the Tower of London 2 weeks ago. I was standing on Waterloo Bridge 2 weeks ago, and here I am at freaking Walmart on Germantown Road in Cordova, Tennessee. Where did I go wrong? And so, yeah, I need those moments of transcendence, and whether it's that or a fishing trip, or just one of the highlights of my trip to London was not anything out of the ordinary for someone who lives there. It was in Oxford, and I went to this little pub on the side in West Oxford, right by a little stream that comes off of the Thames there, and I was just sitting outside having a lager and lime, and these two dogs started playing, and they were so funny, and I was able, everyone was commenting on it, and there was no American interloper thing. Everyone was just enjoying the sunny day and a drink, and how funny the dogs were, because this little bitty dog was just going to kill this great big dog, and the great big dog thought it was a really boring game, but one dog was just going hell bent for leather. The other dog's like, oh, that's cute. Can do that again? Cool. And it was really nice for, I don't know, there just wasn't any sense of being, none of us were different. We're just enjoying the sunny day and how silly dogs are. You know, it was a nice thing. It was a nice thing, a very, very nice drink. And it was very nice, especially being there when it was like 74 during the day. When in Memphis it was 104. So we came back and it was like a weight settled back on us. Let's see. Hey, here on Mars. Going back to the Bowie theme. Thank you very much. Any opinion of things like the Valve Junior Blackheart amps from the? I don't know anything about the Blackheart amps. The Valve Juniors were terrible. I'm sorry. And I remember everyone was like, "Hey, we can mod this thing." I'm like, you can, but just buy a better amp to begin with. Yeah, any of the top hats in your price range are fantastic. Top hat, I'm not a big fan of how Brian does the master volume, but everything else in a top hat is top notch. You know, I've got a playlist called Turds, and I've got a playlist called Gems. And guess which playlist Top Hat's in? Anything Top Hat makes that you can afford that does the trick for you is a great choice. Yeah, you're just walking through the place and you're like, oh, that's Chaucer. Oh, that's Edward the First. Oh my God, that's Queen Elizabeth and her sister Mary. You know, we're back in the late, was it right behind the Lady Chapel? And I look down, I'm like, oh, I'm dancing on Cromwell's grave. It's so, you know, both as someone who's an amateur historian and as someone who did theater, you know, just from a student of Shakespeare's perspective, it all becomes so much more real in an eerie. I mean, yeah, bro, yeah, this is great, but turn around. Henry V is right here. You know, he's not looking his best, but he's right here. It's so strange. It's hyper real. Here on Mars says, I haven't been able to spend time in Europe, but being on the Nile River in Uganda, Sudan definitely falls into that transcendent arena. Wow. Yeah, that is a part of the world I would love to visit sometime. I have to admit that I'm hoping that in my lifetime, the political situation in Egypt primarily, but also Uganda and Sudan improves. I would love to go to that part of the world at a time when I would feel safe and welcome. I don't want to get into that kind of politics, but beautiful part of the world, and we were just my wife and I were geeking out over the Rosetta Stone, and you know, between the British Museum and the Ashmolean in Oxford, we were certainly going back to Assyria and Egypt quite a bit. You know, we've also done the Met, so we've had a lot of Egyptology in our travels. But it's you know, when we were at the Ashmolean, there was a statue of a god from like 3,000 years ago, before the modern pantheon of Egyptian gods was invented. You know, this is before Osiris and Isis and all that. This was a god, kind of a giant stone stick figure with a huge phallus. I'd show you a picture, but I'd have to have more. Have to demonetize myself probably, but it was so amazing to see. That is just so old. That is just so old, and it is so strange to think about how long we've been, well, I'm not going to say inventing gods, but, you know, I guess I just did. So, newsflash. It's interesting to me that the human desire for such things. You know, I'm guilty of it myself to some degree. I wish Gandalf was real. Do I work on custom amps? No, they are junky. I'm sorry. Yeah, they're not worth it. Hey, Alex, 2112. He's got an old Marshall 50 watt 800. All right. So you got the split channel reverb model. Loves it. Sounds great. Nice reverb. I've let it sit and never play it. Will it make the caps go bad quicker? Yeah. You need to give the thing some power, at least a couple hours once a month. Power it on for 30 minutes to an hour. Strum through it. The longer it sits unpowered on, the faster the caps will fail. And the caps, contact a tech. There are two versions of the switching circuit in that Marshall, and send some photos to me or someone, and or Brad. Have a tech sell you like 2 or 3 of the chips used for the switching circuit, because it's an obsolete chip, and if you wait too long to change it out, there won't be one that's good, and when it fails, the amp will just be bad because that chip fails in the channel switching, and before it fails, you get terrible channel leakage, and it just never sounds right. It will go wrong at some point in the split channel reverb. If I owned one and I loved it, I'd want 5 of those chips. Everything else can be changed out. Hey, Sergeant Grinch, I have not played, I don't think I've played the ST20H Marshall. I would avoid any of the Marshalls these days. I don't know what your price range is, but I mean, for an entry-level amp for your grandson, I think that even a Boss Katana 50 Mark II would probably be a better choice than the ST20H. He'll have more sounds. He'll have the ability to use headphones or record in his computer. And if it lasts 10 years, if it lasts 5 years, you're not out a lot of money. But I don't know what styles he plays. If he's a second year, he's probably not to the point where this amp only does that certain thing, only does that thing kind of well. It needs, he doesn't need a mega specialized amp for that. I would look at the Boss Katana, maybe the Line 6 Catalyst, which is a prettier looking amp, but I don't know if it's gonna be as good. I've got there's also does he need an amplifier is one of the big questions, because the HX Stomp with headphones or into computer monitors, speakers, is going to give really good sounds. The DSL-40 is a good amp if you need a jack of all trades kind of thing, but I don't think it's a great amp. I think if you need to do a top 40 gig and get 3 or 4 very different sounds, and you want it to be tube versus solid state or modeling, I think the DSL-40C is good. You can see that my amp's under 500 video, my amp's under 1,000 video. I don't think it's great, but I think it's very good and will make a lot of people happy. I have not tried the HRDX by PRS. I'd have to have one before I can make a recommendation on that. I've had PRS amps in that were fantastic, like the Grissom series. I've had PRS amps that are terrible, like the 2-channel C and 2-channel H and the Archon. So I don't know where the HRDX 20 falls in the dichotomy of PRS quality out there. Hey, Rustin Mohican. Yeah, thank you. I've been playing around. I found some settings make me very happy with this, including different focal length. The camera is squeezed in this tiny little gap between a speaker and my monitor, and I've got the big light here. But from your perspective, it's all fine. From my perspective, it's just amazing that it works, but it does. So cool. I'm glad it's looking good out there. Hey, D-Mac, any info for how the Runt 20 and Little Sister compare and contrast? I have not tried the Little Sister. I would ask Dave Friedman. He will tell you honestly. They're both good amps, but I don't know how they sound, how different they are from each other, or whether one would be better for your needs than the other. Hey, Diego. He says he's a proud owner of my 3.14 pedal. He'd be thrilled to bits if I could offer any information about it. Cheers, Alan. Oh, hey, Alan. Well, yeah, as you might expect from the name 3.14, it is a big muff pedal. It is Pi, big muff Pi. Basically, I wanted a big muff pedal that sounded the same on Tuesday as it did on Wednesday, because the old big muffs varied quite a bit, and there was a range of sounds I wanted to get, and I had the voice switch goes between silicon clipping and germanium. So I wanted something that, while it would not respond to guitar volume as much like a fuzz face, would still give some fuzz facey sounds. I wanted, basically, you could do everything Gilmour did from 68 to 78 in one pedal with a very low noise floor. So it is basically a very well built, high quality, big muff Rams head variant with a mids controlled. Depending on which version you have, it either has a pot or a switch, which goes between Ram's head and triangle, or in between. But also gave the ability to have germanium clipping, which in that circuit really is audibly different and gives a different overtone series and a spongier, more Hendrixian response. And I thought it really sounded great. I didn't think it was anything earth-shaking. It wasn't anything dramatic. It was just better built than most, and especially on the first 5 years worth, when I was still able to get good quality 1 in 34As, the old germaniums. It was a very nice pedal, and if you have one and you love it, don't drop it, because those germaniums are glass bodied, though I did put a dab of silicone typically on them. I just thought it was it was a pedal that I didn't find anyone making at the time. I guess the closest thing out there was Damage Control, or whatever they were called, but that was all hand built and unobtainium, and I thought it was a bit silly for anything to be like that. So I built a high quality PCB with an intelligent ground scheme and stuff like that. So, but all it is a well done variant of a big muff with some versatility built into it. So that's all. That's as good as you can get from most pedals. Is, hey, yeah, it's a good version of it with more versatility built in. Let's see. I think we're at back when over an hour ago. All right, let's get to these super chats. We're going to have to be wrapping this up pretty soon. Thank you, Peaceful Warrior 1959. I appreciate that. I would love to just talk about the trip. Maybe I'll do a separate stream and make it very clear that, hey, if you want to hear about my trip, I'll tell you about my trip. But I don't want to inflict that on those of you who want to know how to make your deluxe reverb sound like a super lead, et cetera, et cetera. I'm partially kidding, but I know I don't want to make it all about me or make it all about just what I want to talk about. But I do appreciate the interest in these things. Hey, Bully. Yeah, I always let owners know. The primary role of the videos is for the owners of amps to see. That's how the whole thing started. It started with just, I take pictures and give text descriptions saying, hey, you've got a burnt out screen grid resistor, and because that screen grid resistor burnt out, it either that damaged the 6L6 or the 6L6 was bad, and that's why you have a burned screen grid resistor. So I'm going to change these two screen grid resistors so they'll both be brand new. I've already verified that everything else in that circuit is fine, but you need another pair of 6L6s. So it's just a way of saying, here's why your car is making that noise. I'm showing you photographic proof of it and a logical explanation, because I never want to be in the position where, like, hey, your dimmophilage is decoupled from the thermocoupler. People are like, okay, how many thousands of dollars will that cost? So I wanted to show people. And then as the phones began to do video very inexpensively and easily, I stopped just doing the photos with text. I did the videos, and it's turned into this. But the primary function of this was always so that the owner of an amplifier could see me open up their amplifier, see me find, diagnose, fix the problem, maybe find some other things while I'm in the neighborhood, and give an explanation that they can understand. And then people liked watching that, and so that's how this turned into all this. I never set out to be like an amp educator or whatever people might describe me as. It's just, hey, your car makes a funny noise, and I've got it on video, and no, you don't need a new transmission. You need 3 new rubber gaskets or whatever. I try to be the bearer of good news, but I always try to be the bearer of realistic news. And sometimes you've been riding that clutch and that transmission shot, and it's going to cost more than the car's worth to fix. But at least that they know I'm telling the truth because they can see it. I can say, look, all these metal filings in the bottom of this thing, this used to be your gearbox. Or sometimes, it's not running because you ran out of gas. Put some gas in it, you're fine, enjoy. I like those days. Let's see. Hey, Chew Bam, I'm glad to know that. Yeah, got the Blues Junior Noise Idle Fix at Work to Treat. I'm glad. Yeah, the hum of those things is so easily fixed most of the time, and it was a bad design, and it's a shame that Fender didn't just change that layout because it would have been so easy to change where that blue wires is. Let's see. A slide carousel. Careful what you ask for, John. Maybe we'll do a my UK trip thing, but I have to do it at a time of day when more UK viewers would be up. So maybe do it like 9 in the morning here. So it'd be what, 2 or 3 in the afternoon for you guys. We'll figure it out. Trying to catch up on everything. People talk about ad blockers and stuff. Yeah, man, I hate the sponsored ads like, hey, I want to tell you, there might be this thing that's going to cause you and your family harm, and you need to know about it. But first, let me tell you about Squarespace. First, let me tell you about this. First, let me tell you, blah, 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 blah. And it's always some garbage. I don't really want to hear about VPNs and website designers from people who don't know anything on the subject other than they're paid for it. And all those bad gluten-free cereals and the meal prep where it's like, hey, you can have airline food every day of the week if you just buy this service. Let's see. Scrolling on. Hey, Mirak. Hello from Turkey. Hello to you. Turkey is a beautiful place, though I don't think it's a good place for me to visit right now. My wife did go to Istanbul about 10 years ago, right before everything started happening in Syria. I hope you and yours are well and are unaffected by all that. It is a beautiful country, and I hope that someday I can come back to it. Oops, wrong button. Sorry. Hey, Jim Jewell, just picked up a 66, 67 AB165. Watched my videos on how to reduce hiss, but his is way hissy. You changed to 864 phase inverter, but the hiss is louder. What can I do? Pretty clean inside. Well, there are 3 things you need to bear in mind. First of all, look at how I changed the plate resistor connection for V1B. That makes a big difference. Second of all, there are some wires beneath the board on an AB165 that can be problematic. Those wires themselves can get dirty and contaminated. Third of all, the mix resistors around V2 are very common places for those things to get noisy. Um, I'm not sure. Without seeing what you did, I don't know if how correctly you might have put it to 864, and I don't know what else you have done on the amp. I'm not trying to say, hey, it's not quiet. Obviously, you messed up, but there may be more to it. And sometimes it's just an old carbon comp resistor gets noisy, and you just got to track down which one it is. Keith's amp, when I first powered it on, was really hissy, and I knew that it was only on the normal channel, and it pretty much had to be the plate resistor. And yep, he had a 100, was supposed to be 100K, measure 112K carbon comp, and it was just noisy as hell. I put in a 100K carbon film, and all the noise went away. If it had been an actual Gibson GA40 from the 1959, I would have put in a non-noisy carbon comp for period correct. But on a clone, just sticking a carbon film. But it can just be one thing throwing you off. But those mix resistors and plate resistors, the places to check first in an AB165. Hey, Scott Brown. He's got a black-faced deluxe reverb that has what looks to be an old realistic Radio Shack speaker from the late 60s. I can buy a blue back Fender speaker, but I'm not sure it's better to go modern. It is definitely going to be better to get a better speaker than that Radio Shack, or the Realistic. That's a terrible speaker. But you don't need to buy an old Fender speaker. Neither do you need to buy anything that says Fender on it. Look more into the subject. Look at all the things that Jensen, the Warehouse, and Eminence, and Weber make. There are a lot of good choices and a lot of good, and Celestion, a lot of great choices for a deluxe reverb. I would not say that a Realistic Radio Shack speaker is one, and neither would I say that I wouldn't necessarily think that an Oxford is the best. I'm not a huge fan of the Oxford 12-inch in a deluxe reverb. I think there are a lot of better sounding speakers, but I don't know what sounds you're trying to get. So, Tones McBones has got an AC30 CC2 that's humming. Controls don't change it. Preamp doesn't change it. Power tubes don't change it. Filtering switch and output do. Any other places to look? Well, if the filtering switches and output power do change it, then you've probably got bad filter caps. Power tubes don't change it. That'd be the other place. If you have non-matched output tubes, you'd probably have no common mode cancellation. But if the filtering changes it, you probably have bad filter caps, and they're just 20 microfarad 450 volt caps in there, so it's pretty easy to change. You got to lift some stuff up, but it's not that difficult. I think it's about time to wrap this up. We are at 2 hours, 3 hours now, sorry. And I got a Ruby. All right, sorry, Jeff Harper. Yeah. The AC15C1 uses the E-series tank, Jeff. Basically, there's the A series that you use for the tube circuits, like on a Fender amp. But the solid state stuff, we use op amps like the AC15C. Uses the E series tank, so you need to look at the impedance. Well, there's a lot of things, but just don't call MOD. They won't be able to tell you. Call Mojo Tone or call what do you call it? I'm trying to remember the name of the company that you would use. I use CE Distribution, but for you guys, it'd be tubesandmore.com. Call them and say, hey, I've got an AC15C1. My tech said I should get an MOD, or if you call Mojo Tone, what tank fits, they'll have a list. It's pretty easy. It's easy to change and they're not expensive. Yeah, the hot kit is good with Voxes, but you don't have to buy an esoteric pedal to get good results with a Vox. That's a nice thing. While certain things do work really well, so would a blues driver set the right way. The trick is knowing how to set it, but that doesn't cost a thing. That just takes time. Let's see. Thank you, Sent to me. Appreciate that. Very helpful and very much appreciated. And I'm scrolling down to make sure I haven't missed any others. I know I got one coming up from Mr. Colby Jack there. And to anyone whose question I'm not getting to this week, well, we'll have to do it again. And I will go back and look at all the questions here that I did not get a chance to answer. Which are a lot of them. There's the one from Colby Jack. Quick hello. His Rivera Venus 6 has been great for 3 months after coming back from the tech. That's good. That's my friend Rick Erickson up in the Seattle area who took care of that for him. My audio and video are both great. Thank you very much. And this means a lot to me because Colby, Mr. Derek there, does voiceover professionally. So it's nice to get that thumbs up from him. That means a lot to me because I do try. I put in a lot of effort on all this. There's a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff you don't think about. Maybe someday I'll clean up the studio enough to do a tour of it. But there's a lot of stuff here you guys never see, and it's been fun to learn about. But it's a lot, and yes, I do get a perverse joy of getting these results from an SM57. On that note, let's begin the sign-off stuff. I appreciate everyone being here. And I may do a My UK trip thing if I can get the slideshow all set up and working for those relatively few of you who would care. But I've got a lot of good stories, and it is fun to talk about this stuff, especially with people who would care, who would also have seen these things and have meaning in it. Travel is the best use of our money and often time. Once, children are fed and shod and clothed and all that stuff and housed, what do you do with it next? Well, some people buy expensive cars or jewelry or golf. I try to see as much of the world as I can in the time I have. And I appreciate you guys spending the time that you have today with me here in little old Memphis. We'll do it again next time.